The Unexamined Life, Reflections of Lessons Learned by George Casey Jr., read by Lorenzo Jacobs. This recording is a production of Lorenzo Jacobs, copyright 2022, Lorenzo Jacobs. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for all brand new content.
Just know that these are books that I've read at least one time. Some of these books I've read a multitude of times. And some books I have yet to even read. So we're going to have fun with this. I think this would be a pretty cool adventure we'll be on reading. Then after I read, we can always have a dialogue, discussion, a conversation around the topics of the book that I'm currently reading. Definitely feel free if you want to join me, follow, send me a request. If you have the book that I'm currently reading, definitely join me with the book if you would want to know where to get the book. If I read any books by unpublished authors, let me know that. Just I'm a real person, know that I enjoy reading, and we'll see where this thing develops. As I know through my entire journey and experience in life, things tend to grow. They don't just stay in one place. So welcome in. This is the first official blast off. I'm gonna read at least a chapter a session, and you can always follow me at my YouTube channel. I'll be putting the complete audio version of any book that I complete on here. So y'all tap in, tune in, and stay turned up with me. So let's go ahead and get into it. Making sure I have everything timed and recorded. So, first book, The Unexamined Life by George Casey Jr. Reflections of Lessons Learned. Let's go ahead and get into this. Forward. Enthusiastic, gregarious, and energetic describes George Casey when I first met him a few years ago at a Toastmaster function. He had a smile that not only lighted his face, but everyone else around him. Once an active duty member of the United States Marine Corps, years ago I was corrected that there are no former Marines. He dressed himself with the confidence and determination one would expect from a Marine. As I read his story, I was shocked to find that there had been two George Caseys. The pre-Marine Corps George Casey was a juvenile delinquent basically who later became an adult delinquent. He and his two best friends made a life of everything that we consider inappropriate. Partying to all hours, booze, drugs, no real purpose, and more than one encounter with the law in a few days in court. Fortunately, through the faith of a family member, he had an epiphany. That epiphany marked the transition moment in his life, and the United States Marine Corps provided the structure to start his transition process. His two best buddies were not so fortunate. They did not have their epiphany and continued their lifestyle until their demise, one natural and one not natural. George Casey's life can be used as an example of two major points. Without guidance and structure, young men will be tempted and many will succumb to the darker side of life. Anyone with will determination, and a purpose can change his life 180 degrees. If you have any doubts, look at George Casey. He has completed his journey? Hardly. He is still on a path of self-improvement, and he is trying to get as many people as he can to join him. Once you have him on your side, you have an unstoppable train next to you. I hope each of you have the opportunity to meet George Casey in person. The experience will be awesome for you. If you cannot meet him in person, then meet him in his writings. Learn the lessons he learned without the experiences he had. Then set yourself on a path to be that awesome person you can be. Lawrence W. Shave Taker, MD. The Unexamined Life, Reflections of Lessons Learned by George Casey, Jr. Introduction. At the time I connected my thoughts to a piece of paper, I will admit, there were no more than that, just words. I had recited those same words hundreds of times in gymnasiums, classrooms, and on stages throughout the United States. They had grown to be the soundtrack of my life. It was as if the words were embedded in both my memory as well as my heart and had served as my personal awakening and call to action. I reminded myself early in the poem, as mentioned above, that I shall not fear, for my destiny lies greater than that which is here. I had embraced the fact that life is all about the journey and not the destination. It's not about where I was, but where I was trying to go. I realized everything I had encountered and would face in life would be to challenge the greatness that was within me. I was confident of the fact that I controlled my destiny, and I was bound only by self-imposed shackles and defeated thoughts. Many of the most intense battles I fought were battles that never existed beyond the borders of my mind. Through my thoughts, I created my imprisoned reality. Many times I would focus on the bombardment of obstacles and challenges that life had to offer, instead of the greatness within. I have found myself focusing on the idea that I was not progressing and felt as if I was standing still. On many occasions, I had overlooked the idea in spite of life giving me some of the greatest blows humanity had ever seen. I endured them. I am still standing. I've had to learn to face life with a confidence that only comes from knowing the greatness lying within me. I had to demand more from life than life demanded from me. I had to demand more from life than life demanded of me. I had to stand up to life, face my opposition, head on as if to say, "Hello, life, let me show you just how great I am." It was in my release of fear that I was able to allow my soul to truly be free and be what God had called me to be. On my journey, my prayer was for peace, not only for myself, but also for those who encompass this world. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates. Chapter 1. The Unexamined Life. Socrates, credited as one of the founders of Western philosophy, once uttered the words, "The unexamined life is not worth living." For centuries, this quote has been examined and debated among scholars and civilians alike. While there are various interpretations, I believe the message to be a personal call to action to those who are seeking to achieve greatness. Socrates' bold words, "not worth living," illustrate just how imperative he thought examination to be. He understood the value in the pursuit of wisdom and knew, in order to obtain this pursued wisdom, one would have to be so daring as to take a personal account of their life's occurrences. They would have to be so daring as to challenge the position of where they are as it correlates to the choices they've made. Socrates charged his students with the notion that every experience is a lesson to be learned. He made it clear that they could change their direction in life at any time through self-examination and positive action in the right direction. Something I wholeheartedly agree with. As a Marine, I have come to know courage as doing what's right and necessary in spite of the circumstances or levels of difficulty. Examining the very depth of my existence took tremendous courage, especially when I started to consider the dark corners of my inner being. I can relate to William Butler Yeats, who said, "It takes more courage to examine the dark corners of your own soul than it does for a soldier to fight on a battlefield." There are plenty of things in my past I would love to forget ever happened, and many I wish I could change. I knew going through with this self-examine would be a tough assignment, but the Marine in me knew it was the right thing to do. As I began to dig out of the cobwebs of and examine my life, I was forced to come face to face with the old me. What was buried years ago yet still continued to haunt me. Over the years, I had purposely kept my distance between the new me and the old me to avoid the pain of my past. Now, for the first time, we were standing eye to eye. In spite of my dark corners, this was my opportunity to examine my life up close and personal. Although the man I am today is far from the child I used to be, I still cringe at the thought of the road I previously traveled. I'm appalled by the person I once was. It is disheartening feeling to know that much of my pain and suffering was avoidable, if only I had thought to make better choices. The more I examined, the more there began to be burning questions at the core of my existence. Does my life have a purpose? What are my values, and am I true to them? Who would I do, or what would I do, if I weren't scared to live my dream? Who would I become? What is my destiny? While I know that it is human nature to question one's current position in life, the truth of the matter is, I had to find a way to shine my light without fear and persistence through the darkness, otherwise known as my past. Now, when I say fear, I'm not speaking of the fear of darkness, for it is not the darkness that I'm afraid of. However, what does scare me is what will be exposed. In other words, when I shine my light into the dark corner, what will be uncovered for everyone to see? That is what I'm most afraid of. The truth I found is the truth I have to live with. The reason I have not become the person I said I would be was for one reason, and one reason alone. I was capital L-A-Z-Y. Hell, laziness and me went together like fat kids and cake. Laziness was my first class seat on Fuck It Airlines. Laziness persisted so long that it carried me away from where I said I would be. I would always tell myself, you would be so much further in life if you weren't so damn lazy. Not only was I lazy, but I also had zero focus, little ambition, and no drive. If that wasn't enough, my self-image was not very favorable. It was a recipe for a disaster. I hated being at that point where there was no one else to blame but me. That's a terrifying feeling. It's always easier to point the finger and say someone else is at fault for not becoming what I said I would, for not achieving what I said I would achieve, for not owning what I said I would own. But when you reach a point where there is no one else to blame but yourself, you are forced to look inward and ask yourself, what gift is within me? Have I opened it yet? What impact might it make if exposed to the world? So many times in life we fear what we don't know, but in many cases, the unknown is exactly what leads us to our greatness if we allow it to. All we need is the courage to examine those dark corners of our souls in order to reveal our true greatness. The things we go through are not intended to make us bitter, but to make us better. Self-examination gives us the authority to change our lives based on applied wisdom. Take a moment to reflect on your current position in life. Are you where you want to be? Have you achieved the things you said you would achieve? Are you the person you said you would become? Why or why not? Take a few more moments and ask yourself, what are you doing to make your goals possible? Over the years, I've heard several excuses to why someone else wasn't successful or why someone else was not the person they should be in life. Reasons like, my dad wasn't there for me, or my mom was on drugs. There's always a tendency to place blame on someone else, leaning on the excuse of other people blocking your blessing. As I stated earlier, this is where the finger pointing begins. The easiest thing to do is point a finger towards someone else, as if it were his or her fault, to say, I did not get that promotion because they don't like me. To excuse oneself from blame by pointing the finger at an outside source is merely a diversion from accountability. As a teenager, I imagined myself a millionaire by the age of 35. Well, as time went on, my dream of being a millionaire seemed to slip further and further from my grasp. In the blink of an eye, my 35th birthday had come and gone, and nothing was like I had envisioned it would be. By the age of 40, I was no closer to being a millionaire than I was at the age of 30. I recently re-examined my goal of being a millionaire and understood that I was the sole blame for why I didn't reach the millionaire status. I wasn't accountable for all the occurrences of my life, which had me to question my destiny to become a millionaire by the calculated birthday. It has become the norm in our society that our economic status determines who we are. Things like the house we live in, the car we drive, where we work, and how many zeros we have in our bank account are all determining factors in our status in life. We go about our daily lives in pursuit of these possessions and our rightful position in society. Keeping up with the Joneses, as it is best known, is living beyond our means just to impress onlookers. This term was given to those who give the impression of having large sums of money, but in actuality, they are penny pinchers. This is an inferiority complex and should be avoided at all costs. I will often ask myself, if all of my possessions were taken away and I had the lowest possible social status, then who would I be at my core? On the surface, this would appear to be a simple question. However, this issue would prove to be one that was much harder to answer. It would take both courage and the commitment to answer truthfully. I challenge you to examine the dark corners of your soul. I also challenge you to be accountable for who you are and who you have yet to become. If what you seek is a better quality of living, the only way this can be obtained is through the examined life. It is only in this pursuit of wisdom that one can indeed expect to grow. Remember, the unexamined life is not worth living. We cannot think of being acceptable to others until we have first proven acceptable to ourselves. Malcolm X. Chapter 2. Life worth living, my life not worth living. I can recall a moment in time. I couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 years old, and my self-esteem was pretty low. I headed home from school after a rough day of struggling with the idea of being me. I wasn't happy with how I saw myself, nor the way I thought others perceived me. I mean, I didn't look like the starting quarterback of a star basketball player, and I certainly wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. The low assessed value I placed on myself led me to a breaking point. That breaking point came sooner than later. I had come home from school that afternoon, put my books away, and headed straight upstairs to lock myself in the bathroom. I grabbed a random bottle of pills out of the medicine cabinet, contemplating suicide. What set of circumstances could make a young boy's mind deter to something of this magnitude? I had yet to experience even a fraction of what life had to offer. Looking back, I couldn't believe I thought about ending my precious and valuable life. Initially, as I reflect on this incident, I wasn't able to come up with many details. The specifics were jumbled, unclear, and sketchy at best. But what I did come up with was the society has a way of ostracizing you to the point where you can begin to associate your very existence with that of being a nuisance. However, succumbing to these pressures is what causes one to miss out on the promise. And although I was young, I knew that a delayed path to being a millionaire was better than never having a chance at all. So over the years, I willfully buried the memory of this day deep in the depths of my soul. My work of self-examination began to take courage at this point, pushing me beyond the thoughts I had chosen to block from this existence. As I stood before the young boy in the mirror, I judged the kid in the reflection as being overweight, inadequate, unattractive, and worthless. I lacked self-esteem and confidence, and instead of addressing these infirmities, I replaced them with trying to be accepted into the in crowd. But constantly trying to appease people is so exhausting. That emptiness you feel when you don't know where you belong is a feeling like no other. However, I've realized I was trying to do too much at once, trying to find myself and figure out life at the same time. All the while, my thought process suggested I was a misfit. In no other place but my mind, the person I was remained consistent with what was necessary to be considered cool or popular. There are many days in my life I wish I could take back in time. I would speak to that young and inexperienced kid with the hopes of somehow instilling confidence, the very confidence it would take to become the great man he was purposed to be. I would tell him about all the people he would meet and the lives he would go on to touch. I would explain to him life is not going to be easy and the road ahead would be hard, insisting the only way to be successful is to persevere through the challenges that life has to offer. As I think back on that day I locked in the bathroom, I recalled the circumstances that nearly led to my demise. I was looking intensely for approval outside of myself and not accepted me for the person I was. My self-image appeared worthless because I had not come to terms with the greatness within. My view of the world and my position in it seemed insignificant due to the lack of information. However, I was only looking at a small snapshot of what was to become. These days, when I find myself passing the mirror, I can't help but spend a few extra minutes admiring my beautiful transformed self. Choosing to accept me has increased my self-image and confidence tenfold. Since I learned to accept myself, others have since accepted me as well. This taught me that long before someone else will love and accept you, you have to love and accept yourself. Oftentimes, we doubt ourselves, but even still, somewhere deep down, there is a voice urging us to be better. Sometimes that voice goes undetected, but it's always there. We find ourselves powerless in circumstances that we feel are out of our control. But today, I accept the fact that disparity and grief in my case were both self-imposed and avoidable. I had the power at any time to change my thoughts and my direction in life. I just chose not to. Now, let's examine the meaning of power. I have heard many definitions over the years, and the one that stuck is the ability to define reality. We always have the ability to define our reality, whether we are aware of it or not. There is a law of belief that says whether you believe with conviction will become your reality. This definition illustrates the connection between our beliefs and our reality. Through our beliefs, we have the ability to change our reality. When we understand our beliefs, we know more than the thoughts we consistently have. We see a simple equation. In order to change anything, we must first change our thoughts. Our thoughts are the bridge between where we are and where we want to be. Before I realized my worth, I was constantly consumed by negative thoughts. You're not good enough, you're too fat, you have a wide nose and nappy hair. The more these thoughts plagued my mind, the more I was convinced this was my truth. In my mind, I wasn't good enough. I was fat, and I did have a wide nose and nappy hair. This was my reality, and I was consumed by it. I basked in negativity as if I was powerless. However, I now realize that I wasn't powerless, but instead, I was just using my power less. In my examination, I took a close look at the effects of my negative self-perception. I lost valuable time and happiness toying with the idea that I wasn't good enough. Marianne Williamson once said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is we are powerful beyond measure." In my case, I feared the glimpse of greatness I felt from time to time. I disregarded the small voice that often reminded me I could be great. I know I have always been able to achieve anything I have put my mind to once I believe in it. The ability always belongs to the individual to define his or her own reality. NFL great Terrell Owens used to always say, "I love me some me." Back in the day, I used to laugh at this statement, but now I have discovered and accepted the greatness that lay dormant inside. For when a man understands what it takes to shape his reality, destiny's path is altered. Chapter 3: The Unexamined Life, Reflections of Lessons Learned. Mind over matter. You may possess anything that you desire, provided that you know exactly what you want it bad enough, confidently expect to attain it, and are willing to pay the price for its attainment. Dr. Dennis Kimbrough. According to Dr. Kimbrough's quote, you may possess anything that you desire, provided that you know exactly what you want. Traveling through time, I found myself, on many occasions, not knowing what I wanted in life. I was a drifter, simply moving along in life with no real purpose. One year, I tried out for the Fort Knox High School football team. I knew I didn't have the desire in my heart to join the team, but following the crowd, I decided to try out anyway. Needless to say, I struggled during practices and hated every minute of it. On one particular day, we were doing a drill called up-downs. The exercise consisted of running in place until the coach blew the whistle. Once the whistle was blown, you flopped to the ground and just as quickly bounced back up and ran in place until the whistle was blown again. During the drill, I could feel myself quickly wearing down as the coach relentlessly blew the whistle. Whistles, down, up, whistle, down, up, whistle. This drill went on for what seemed like hours. After a while, it became mind over matter. Only this time, the mind would lose. Exhaustion had officially set in, and it was hard to breathe. The sun was scorching hot, and sweat began pouring down my face in puddles. With every blow of the whistle, my body would tire as my legs began to turn to mush. We continued doing up down until I could barely feel my arms. All I could think about was the pain and how much I wanted the pain to stop. It was then that I set my mind on a number. More than 20 years later, I can still remember the number. The number was 5. My mind was made up. I could only do 5 more before I quit. I was convinced I didn't have it in me to go past 5. 5, 4. As the countdown began in my mind, I remembered wishing Coach would stop the practice. I hoped for a water break, for any break for that matter, but there was no relief in sight. 3, 2. The pain continued, and it was unbearable and excruciating. The pain wanted me to quit, and I obeyed. The seed was planted in my mind. 1 more, and I'm done. Whistle, down. As I lay there mentally defeated from the drill, I was barely able to lift my tired, warm body off the ground. It took everything I had in me to stand up from what I had convinced myself to be the final up-down. In that moment, I did it. I announced, I quit, and walked off the field. As I strolled off the field, I watched as my teammates continued to endure their punishment. Deep down, I hoped someone else would join me in resigning, but they kept going. I walked off the field and found a seat at the top of the hill overlooking the practice field. I watched as moments later practice began to wind down. The coach once again blew the whistle, this time signaling for the team to huddle up around him. He gave them the usual end of practice pep talk and then dismissed them until the next day's practice. At that point, what I had done started to sink in. I questioned, could I have gone a little longer? The true answer was yes, I could have. I realized I never confidently expected to attain victory on that day. I didn't make myself willing to pay the price for its attainment. Looking back, I just didn't want it bad enough. The practice was over and the crowd began to trickle out of the locker room. I caught up with one of my teammates who asked, Casey, why'd you quit? We only did a few more up-downs after you quit. Coach told us that he intentionally kept doing up-downs just to see who didn't have it in them. He said he knew there would be at least one who didn't have the mental toughness to endure the pain, nor the determination to endure the suffering. My teammate told me that the coach knew someone would quit due to the lack of motivation and drive. That someone just happened to be me. I often tell myself, if there was some way I could have known there would only be a few more up-downs, I could have completed the task. If I could have somehow seen the finish line and knew that the end of torture was near, I certainly would have made it to the end. I now understand my focus should always be on my desired outcome. After careful self-examination, I have learned that when my heart is not in it, I shouldn't expect to attain my desired result. There has to be something to drive you forward. That driving force is usually passion. When you have that passion in your heart for the attainment of a thing, you become an unstoppable force to be reckoned with. Many battles have been fought and lost that have never gone beyond the borders of the mind. The battles tend to be won by our most dominant thoughts. There is not much more powerful than a mind made up or a made up mind. There is nothing more commanding than a mind that exercises that power. More often than not, the people who achieve the most in life are the ones who know exactly what they want it bad enough, confidently expect to attain it, and are willing to pay the price for its attainment. This is the Unexamined Life, Reflections of Lessons Learned, authored by George Casey Jr. Chapter 4, Too Cool for School. You're too cool for school, Coach Joe Dickerson. It was Friday morning, the day of the big party. I woke up early this particular morning with the excitement as I hurried to school. I knew it was going to be what I called an easy day. An easy day for me was having a couple of hours off from class to attend some boring play or assembly. I arrived at school that morning with the party on my mind. It's going to be a good day, I thought to myself. As I walked into school, I located the crew standing in our normal spot in the hallway. After giving everybody dap, a handshake known by the fellas, we immediately began talking about the party. This would be the one no one wanted to miss. The DJ was going to be spinning all the latest jams, there was going to be underage drinking, and of course, all the fine girls from school were going to be there. We talked up the party until just about the time for the second bell to ring, and it was time to start heading to homeroom. I shook the crew's hand and strolled on and barely making it on time. I found my seat and listened as the principal came over the PA system and announced the play. He instructed all students to proceed to the PAC room, or Power Alumni Performing Arts Center, immediately after the bell rings. I began heading over to the center, located directly across the street from the school as instructed. While en route, I hooked up with a group of my partners. Before I knew it, out came a couple of bottles of the few best wine low money next to no money can buy. Mad Dog 2020 was a bottle of cheap wine that probably cost less than a few dollars at best. Knowing this group like I did, no one paid for the bottles anyway. I was a little hesitant at first until the wine started flowing. I figured the Mad Dog would kick the party off earlier than originally expected, so I took a sip when my turn came around. We began to pass the bottles around, and each person would take a drink. Once both bottles were done dry, we figured it was now time to head over to watch the play. It was 2 hours of pure boring torture. I began nodding off as soon as the lights went off. To this day, I don't know if it was the effect of the Mad Dog 2020 or if the play was just that mind-numbing. When the play was over, the group hooked back up. This time, we quickly passed around mouth spray and gum to ensure the liquor smell on our breath would go undetected. In the distance, I could hear the bell ring and knew I wasn't going to make it to class on time. By the time I finally started my way to class, there was no need to rush since I was already late. In fact, I strolled into Coach Dickerson's intro to biology class about 10 minutes after the bell rang. Coach Dickerson was one of the varsity football coaches. He was a man with little patience and zero tolerance for chewing gum in his class. Not only was I late to class, but I also was chewing gum. "Mr. Casey," Coach Dickerson barked. So gladly you can join us today. Oh, and is that gum that you have in your mouth? You just too cool. Then he asked me to spit my gum into the trash. I could have lived with the outcome, but what came next would go on to ruin the rest of my weekend. Coach went on to say, as a matter of fact, you go down to the principal's office. You be sure to let him know that you're too cool for school. I stepped slowly to the principal's office, knowing that this would be a deal breaker when I got home. There was going to be no party for me. The visit to the principal's office led to a one-day suspension, and the principal called my mom and told her of the news. My mom, in turn, informed me that since I was too cool for school, I was too cool for the party and grounded me. During this time, I was drifting too far, too fast. There were plenty of school nights that I can recall being passed out drunk. I knew my mom was a heavy sleeper, so once she fell asleep, I knew that was the end of the night for her. Once I thought that the coast was clear, I would stuff clothes under my comforter to look like I was asleep. I would then slip out the back door, heading over to the hangout spot. Regardless of the time of day, there was always something going on at the hangout spot. There was drinking, smoking, cars, women, and just being wild. I began watching as things would occur at the spot that my virgin eyes were not yet ready to see. I saw a lot of and learned a lot, as if receiving two educations, one in school and one when I would hit the streets. The more I hung out, the more I began to care less about doing well in school. It became much more important for me to hang out than finish any homework assignments. There was a time I made good grades because I wanted to. At this point, I started to care less and my grades began to slip drastically because of it. I was certainly too cool for school. They say, when you know better, you do better. I've also heard knowledge is power. Although they are catchy and convincing, I believe both direct declarations to be untrue. First, I'll give my reasoning in the initial statement. When you know better, you do better. In all my life, it seems I have known better, but didn't always do better. In fact, usually when I would get in trouble, you know better, would always follow. Now, the latest statement, knowledge is power. I discussed in the earlier chapter that power is the ability to define reality. When you consider knowing better, I didn't do better, and power began being an ability to define reality. It is evident in both instances there's only a potential. Knowledge is only potential power. It becomes power only when the knowledge is gathered, filtered, and applied. Growing up, when I heard the word potential, I would always put it in the negative connotations. I think when people spoke of my potential, it was always how I wasn't living up to my potential. Now I look at potential as authority. With a vast of unlimited knowledge at my disposal, I have been given the power to be as great or as powerful as I give myself to be. These days, I am no longer too cool for school. I now take learning seriously, and I am always looking for information that I can use to advance me forward. Because I know I have the potential to be as great as I allow myself to be, I feel it is my obligation to learn something every day that didn't know before. I believe the moment you stop learning and growing, you start to die. Don't be afraid to explore your potential to be great. It's in you. Chapter 5, Lessening Greed. For greed, all nature is too little. Lucius Annius Seneca. As long as I live, I will never forget West and T. These were a couple of my partners in crime during my sophomore year of high school. We all worked together as baggers at the local grocery store, a job that had the potential to pay well if you had a bit of hustle and drive about you. There were plenty of times we left work for over $100 for the day as a result of our hustle. On these days, we had to grind hard to make things happen. One day, after a hard day's work and real money to show for our efforts, Weston T and I began discussing various alternative methods of getting money. There's got to be a better way, T explained. It wasn't long before we went from legal means of earning an income to obtaining money by any means necessary. Somehow, the plan we settled on was to break into arcade games to steal the quarters. It started out being a one-time deal. That was until we saw how many quarters were actually inside the machines. It was as if we were in Vegas and the flashing lights were going off while spitting out our winnings. The job simply took a screwdriver and a good tug to get to the jackpot and no more than a couple of minutes to collect the quarters and dash. I guess just like anything else in life, the more you do something, the easier it becomes. We were surprised to walk away from the first heist as easily as we did. Our three-man crew started calculating just how much potential there was in business of breaking into video games. It wasn't long we began hitting several machines all over town. After a while, the quarters in the games just simply weren't enough. We patiently waited for a big score, and at that point, greed took effect. We hit the mother lode when we turned our sights to the dollar change machines. Yes, that's right, the big machine found in the arcade rooms that took dollar bills versus coins. Our thought process was if we could get into one of those machines, we would be set, thinking small-minded. It seemed as if we had found the perfect plot. While scoping out the targeted location, we discovered it was in a very secluded area and there would be plenty of time to break into the machine. We felt we could easily retrieve its contents and be on our way undetected. Again, this is what we thought. Things were a little slow at work, so we decided to take a break. The crew loaded into Wes's car and headed to our selected location. We waited for the coast to be clear and exited the vehicle with our crowbar and screwdrivers concealed. Once inside, we quickly went to work on the machine. No matter how much we tried, we couldn't bust in. After going at it for about 20 minutes or so, we met defeat and gave up. We found the task to be impossible and decided to leave. The grocery store where we worked wasn't too far from the location, so we decided to go back there. Things at work were still slow. I contemplated leaving but decided to tough it out. I watched the look in T and Wes's eyes and knew they were not going to settle for defeat, as they agreed the machine was not going to beat them. They were determined and decided to go back and get what they thought was rightfully theirs. As they re-entered the establishment, they were spotted, and the police were called to investigate. Within minutes, they had the place surrounded. T took off on foot, and Wes managed to get to his vehicle and was chased in a high-speed pursuit. They were both eventually caught and arrested. It wouldn't be long before there was a knock at my door, with detectives asking my whereabouts, followed by a summons to appear in court. We were three kids that started off just trying to get enough quarters to escape going to work. As greed began to take over, enough would never be enough. The truth is, if we hadn't gotten caught that day, we would have kept robbing machines. Above all, my takeaway from this reflection was a lesson in greed. Our three-man crew agreed we would only break into only one machine, even though we had no business breaking into machines in the first place. There were certainly more than enough quarters from the very first job to not do it again. Through the examination of my life, I watched as those three young men were overtaken by the lust of wanting more. With every break-in, there was an increased desire for more until eventually we got caught, as it was only in a matter of time. Luckily, at the time, T and I were juveniles, so we were released with probation and had to pay restitution to the machine owners. Wes, on the other hand, was 18 years old and was tried as an adult. Given the circumstances along with the severity of the high-speed chase, he faced jail time. We made several wrong choices that led down a criminal path. Our troubles could have been avoided if we had stayed at work and earned our money the right way, through working hard. I have since learned the only place success comes before work is in a dictionary. Wes, T, and I were looking for an easy way out, but what we found was easy trouble, which ended up being hard to get out of. Chapter 6, Out of Control. Be careful of your thoughts, for your thoughts become your words. Be careful of your words, for your words become your actions. Be careful of your actions, for your actions become your habits. Be careful for your habits, for your habits become your character. Be careful of your character, for your character becomes your destiny. A Chinese proverb. During my sophomore year in school, I can recall there was a lot of violence surrounding school events. It seemed as if the students were on a warpath. There were fights almost every day, and it got to the point that the violence could no longer be ignored by the school's administration. One day, I recall the voice which sounded loud and clear over the PA system. Will all the black students please report to the gym? I couldn't believe the words I heard coming over the intercom. A fight in the cafeteria and the stabbing of a student at a home basketball game were amongst the incidents prompting a call of all black students to the gym. There were blank looks on some faces, confusion on others, but everyone wanted to know about this announcement. The report prompted immediate dialogue from classrooms throughout the school. Black students were trying to figure out if they should go, as well as some white students that hung with the black students that asked if they should go. There were even some mixed students who questioned if they were black enough to go. The issue was a picturesque moment as black students began trickling out of their classrooms heading for the gym. Mrs. Hill and Coach McCoy, two respected members of the black faculty, met us all in the gym. The look on their faces gave every indication the gathering was not intended for our liking. Students quickly found their seats in the bleachers as the meeting began. Coach McCoy silenced the entire gym asking, "Will all the members of Rated R stand up?" I was not a member of this group yet, but I joined a couple of years later. His request was followed by, "Will all the members of Maniac Motion stand up?" The third request came, "Will all the members of NIE, Niggas in Effect, stand up?" It was during that call I rose to my feet as calls for different associations continued. All the while, the silence remained. Mrs. Hill and Coach McCoy instructed us to reflect on the incident involving a student being stabbed the night before while attending our school basketball game. They asked the students still sitting to look at those who were standing. Those of us who were standing were invited to think about the paths we were traveling down in life. Although given the opportunity to do so, I didn't give much thought to it then. However, as I look back on my character, the path I was traveling was very discouraging, as my character slowly reflected that of a menace to society. I recall one day in particular, there was a not so bright idea to rob the pizza man. The plan was to call one of the local pizza places and have them deliver pizza to an empty house. We would then proceed to take all the money he earned delivering that day. The first attempt turned out to be just a dry run as we watched the delivery guy come and go. The next attempt was the time to go. We found a different empty house in the neighborhood and decided this would be it. I'll never forget, it was a cold and dreary day. The drizzle of the rain kept my attention as I remember now how nervous and scared I was. Everyone in our four-man crew grabbed their masks to conceal their face and a weapon of choice as we waited patiently for the victim to arrive. I remember asking myself, what are you thinking? If the truth was revealed, I wasn't thinking at all. But this was the avenue I chose and the price I was willing to pay in order to be considered down and accepted in the crew. There I stood in the drizzling rain as we watched the driver exit his vehicle. He grabbed the pizzas and proceeded to the empty house. I was mortified, but it was too late to turn back now. I took one last breath. We jumped out from our hidden location prepared to do damage to retrieve all the money the driver was carrying. With literally no time to spare, the house was called off as the leader of the crew recognized the driver as one of his classmates. While conversing, the driver revealed it was standard procedure that each driver carried no more than $20 for instances like this. Just for the sake of stealing something, we took the pizzas and walked off. We didn't worry that the victim had seen our identity as we were assured if he told, we would be back to handle him. We never considered robbing the pizza man again. However, I continued thinking and acting like a menace until it became a part of my character. In my heart, I knew I was doing wrong, but my attitude towards life at the time was shallow. Had I kept that same mentality, I often thought if I would be alive today. Where I was headed compared to where I ended up after two very different paths. Had I continued on my journey with the same thought process, my destiny would have been disastrous. I'm certain I would have either been locked up in prison or lying in a cemetery had I not altered my path. According to one of my favorite Chinese proverbs, be careful. The piece alerts us to the fact that our thoughts ultimately predicts our character and fulfills our destiny. To test this theory, I began to look at some of my favorite actors over the years. The likes of Gary Coleman, Jaleel White, and Denzel Washington are among the few. Gary Coleman was a child star in the 70s and 80s who is best remembered as the lovable character Arnold Drummond on the hit 70s TV show Different Strokes. His famous catchline on the show was, "What you talk about, Willis?" When Arnold used this line, audiences would die laughing in hysterics. Years later in the interview, Coleman was asked to recite his famous line from years ago. The audience was stunned when he didn't. He continued, "It's not that I wouldn't do it. I lost the job because I can't do it. I don't have it in me anymore." He went on to explain how he now sounded silly saying the line. Many times when I speak to organizations about character, I'll ask the audience if anyone knows who Jaleel White is. Occasionally, I'll get one or two hands that go up, but for the most part, no one ever seems to know who he is. I will then come back and ask if anyone knows who Steve Urkel is, to which hands immediately fill the air. People have come familiar with Steve, the character, not Jaleel White, the man. For this reason, he was typecast into a role that he had trouble separating himself from. Years later, when the character Urkel no longer appealed to him, he was quoted as saying, "If you ever see me doing that character again, put a bullet in my head and put me out of my misery." Denzel Washington shocked audience when he played Detective Alonzo Harris in the 2001 film Training Day. For the first time, I saw my favorite actor as I hadn't seen him before. I was used to seeing Denzel playing the good guy. In Training Day, his character was everything but the good guy. He played a corrupt detective running an elite narcotics unit. The character was willing to do anything it took for the mighty dollar, including lie, cheat, steal, or kill. Mr. Washington, for the first time in movies, says he played a truly evil character. He explained, "It's not for want of trying. That's not how Hollywood perceives me. I can understand. It took me a while to get used to this new character. Oddly, after being nominated 3 times for Best Actor in a Leading Role, Denzel finally won an Oscar for his portrayal in this film." Go figure. We become accustomed to characters the more we allow them to entertain us. First, we get familiar with the way a character thinks, and then the words they speak followed by their actions. It is usually known as being out of character when a person is not acting a part as we have anticipated it to be. We come to know these characters in our mind as the process typecasts, leaving the actor little to no room for growth. In all 3 instances, each character evolved with first changing their thinking. Who they became was not who they thought they should be. As their thought process began to change, so did their destiny. We have the same ability. One of my friends used to say, "We're all actors, but we just might not make as much as the actors in Hollywood make." I love the textbook definition of insanity: doing the same thing over and over expecting a different result. To change your character, you must first modify the way you think. As the effect ripples, eventually your actions will be altered, followed by your habits. When you begin to think, speak, and act in a more positive manner, your habits have no choice but to produce a positive character as well. In the progression, our destiny is based on our thoughts. If you consistently think a certain way, you will continue to be the same way. Chapter 7, DWB. If you want to test a man's character, give him power. Abraham Lincoln. Since early in my life, I was all about partying and having a good time. In 1991, during my junior year of high school, a few friends and I were driving to a party. All of a sudden, our vehicle was pulled over and we were surrounded by police officers. With guns drawn, they demanded that everyone get out of the vehicle. Clueless to what we had done, we were thrown off by the specific tone used by the officers. One by one, and not knowing what to expect, we exited the vehicle with extreme caution. Forcefully, one of the officers yelled, "Get on your knees with your fingers interlocked behind your head." At this point, I noticed more flashing lights as officers from the K-9 unit arrived. The dogs were released from the vehicles, coming within inches of us. The officers began asking us a series of questions and inquired our whereabouts for the evening. Still confused, I asked one of the officers to tell us what we had done wrong, why we were pulled over. His reply was simple: Sit there and shut up. I'm the one asking the questions here. All the while, the dogs were viciously barking and growling. It was both an embarrassing and degrading moment, as we had become the focus of attention in the neighborhood. The residents began peeking out of their windows, while some came out of their homes to investigate the commotion. Rubberneckers also began slowing down not to miss any of the action. The abuse went on for an additional 30 minutes before being told we were free to go. It turned out they were looking for another quarter load of black boys and an entirely different colored vehicle. It was a hard pill to swallow. We were stopped, searched, and harassed for absolutely no reason. The officers apologized as best they could, I guess, but after receiving that kind of mistreatment, even 1,000 apologies would not be good enough. Getting pulled over and harassed certainly left a bad taste in my mouth toward law officials. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last time it would happen. Around this time, several instances like this were taking place. So much, in fact, terms such as racial profiling and DWB, driving while black, would start to ring out in communities around the world. It's tragic something like this can still be going on today, but not surprising. With the addition of cell phone cameras and use of social media, much attention has been brought to this claim of officers abusing their power and police brutality towards blacks and other minorities. Movements like Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter have overshadowed the truth that all lives matter. The fact that we focus on any one more than another suggests there is a severe problem the world is facing. Many would like to simply sweep this problem under the rug or somehow dismiss the experiences of those violated, pretending they don't exist. I know firsthand the struggle is real. I have firsthand accounts of receiving abuse from police officers that have been unjustified and unwarranted. Because I haven't always been on the right side of the law, I fully understand there are instances when aggression and force are necessary. Now, even as an adult getting pulled over, I am extremely cautious. I keep my hands on the steering wheel to avoid excessive hand movement. I answer yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, and no, sir, or no, ma'am. I don't want there to be any question as to whether or not I'm coming across as aggressive. In spite of all of these things, I have encountered situations when the officer was either not used to black people or straight up racist. I don't know whether the hiring process needs to change or whether more laws need to be in place to protect the citizens, but I know something needs to be implemented. It's disheartening when you see young men and women being murdered by those sworn to uphold the law. If all lives matter, then we need to start acting like it. I don't believe all officers are bad and abuse their powers. In fact, I have met several on my journey in life that were cool, respectful, and down to earth. I do, however, believe there are good officers that know who the bad ones are and are not exposing them. For the situation to improve, we must first admit there is a problem. Chapter 8: Seek Wise Counsel. In 1992, the time had come for our senior exit interviews. The interviews consisted of the seniors sitting down with the guidance counselors to discuss their plans after graduation. I sat in the waiting area outside of Mrs. Lewis's office while she wrapped up her meeting with another student. "Mr. Casey," she called out, "please step into my office." Once inside, we quickly began speaking of my future plans. "So, George," she stated while thumbing through some papers on her desk, What are your plans after graduation? I thought for a moment and really didn't have an answer for her. With no definite plans, the only thing I knew for sure at this point was that I was ready to graduate high school. After a short pause, I blurted out, I guess I'll give college a try. Mrs. Lewis immediately stopped what she was doing and gave me her full attention. Without hesitating, she looked me in the eyes and responded, No. She then continued with, I think the military would be a better fit for you. She might as well have said, You're not good enough for college, because that's what I heard. I didn't know how to take this, so I thought to myself, I'll show her. I never could stand it when another person expressed to me that I cannot do a particular thing, and this time was no exception. With the sole purpose of defying that advice given by Mrs. Lewis and proving her wrong, I started putting in college applications to any school I thought might take me. After months of careful consideration, the University of Louisville accepted me. I was on my way. On move-in day, I moved into my assigned dorm, Cardinal Hall. To my surprise, two of my good friends, Lopez and Pookie, were also assigned to Cardinal Hall. This assignment was a game changer, being that three of us were all in the same dorm, always led to many nights of partying. It wasn't long before we were hanging out more than we were going to class. The focus shifted to drinking, chasing women, playing cards, and shooting dice. We would hang out until all hours of the morning, ending up too tired for class. This began the norm on a day-by-day basis, turning into a week-by-week basis, which caused my grades to suffer tremendously. Occasionally, while hanging out into the early morning hours and with the majority of the university campus sound asleep, the fire alarm will often mysteriously go off. This prank would often lead to students being awakened, angered, and forced to leave their warm beds. Since we were usually still up partying, the early morning fire alarms never bothered us. For us, it would just be a matter of collecting all the money from the dice game or gathering your spades hand and heading outside. One morning, while standing outside after an early morning alarm, a confrontation started between my partner Pookie and one of the disgruntled students. I will admit he did have a tendency to play a lot, even at 4 o'clock in the morning. Before I knew it, I pushed Pookie out of the way to confront the guy myself. Pookie was one of the smallest guys in our crew, so it only seemed natural to step in. Before long, the argument had escalated to the disgruntled student's friend making mention of going to his car and to get his pistol. The mention of a gun triggered my other partner, Lopez, to dare the guy, saying, First you have to make it to your car. The escalation dissolved, and before long we received that all was clear to re-enter into the dorm. A few hours later, it would be time to pack up and head home to Fort Knox for the weekend. I met with Lopez when I returned to school Sunday night. He told me he had been approached by the two students that we exchanged words with just a few nights before. He said they knocked on his door while he was in the shower. When he heard the knock, he grabbed his towel and answered the banging at the door. Lopez went on to explain, they tried to get a little rowdy, but they didn't really want none. He then informed me one of the guys asked for me by name. He told Lopez to make sure that I got the message. He was looking for me. Lopez gladly relayed the message to me. I didn't like the fact that someone was looking for me and was asking for me by name. I told Lopez that I was going to reverse that. From this moment on, I'm looking for them. I went and knocked on the guy's door that was so-called looking for me. When he answered the door, he was surprised to see me and acted as if he really didn't know who I was. With Lopez standing there as my witness, I asked him, "Why did you go to Lopez's room making threats and asking for me?" His tone and demeanor changed drastically as he began to speak that "we shall overcome" talk. He stated that we didn't need to be fighting one another. He continued, "Instead, we should stick together and go against the white man." I couldn't do anything but laugh and walked away. Looking back over my time spent at the University of Louisville, I examined the error of my ways. I recall the first day of classes. I walked into each classroom to find 40, 50 of the brightest students on campus. Each one had come eager to learn and grow, while I had come to prove Miss Lewis wrong. All of my professors collectively agreed their job was not to babysit us. One explained, "I don't take attendance. It's your responsibility to make it to class to get the information." I instantly came up with a bright idea that I would get the notes from other students and only show up on test days. After the first test or two, I realized I just didn't know the information enough to pass the class. I lacked the necessary discipline to sustain on this level. I was more concerned with partying, gambling, and trying to prove I was the man on campus than the opportunity I had before me. Could it be that Miss Lewis didn't see enough drive and determination in me to make it on a collegiate level? Perhaps. She could have known the discipline I would receive from the military would somehow put me on track to possibly later come back and try college again. I believe Mrs. Lewis had my best interests in mind that day. She offered assistance, and I refused the help because I thought I knew it all. Sometimes in life, our egos can get in the way and keep us from our best. In this case, I let my pride get in the way of sound advice and counseling trying to prove Miss Lewis wrong. Over the last 20 years or so, I've harbored ill feelings toward her and the implication of not having what it took to go to college. In my quest to prove her wrong, I only ended up proving her right, especially when it turned out Mrs. Lewis was indeed correct in her assumption that the military would be the best route for me. It wasn't until I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, one of the toughest branches of the military, that I began to get the structured discipline I needed. I always tell people if you can become a Marine, you can be anything else you want. The Marines not only instilled in me discipline, but courage and confidence as well. My life is on a different path now, as I have since gone back and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in business management. I believe no one can be successful alone. On my journey, I have encountered many people that have helped me along the way. Mrs. Lewis is one of those people. She gave me the best advice I never followed, all because I let pride and ego get in the way of information that was intended for me to improve. I realized to be helped, you must also be willing to receive counsel. We are selfish when we are exclusive or predominantly concerned with the good for ourselves. We are altruistic when we are exclusively or predominantly concerned with the good of others. Mortimer Adler. Chapter 9. Selfish. By the end of summer 1993, I decided it was time to make a move. Due to my poor choices at U of L, I transferred to Valencia Community College in Orlando, Florida. Within the first couple of days of my arrival, I hooked up with my cousin Mark. As youngsters, Mark and I grew up more like brothers even though we grew up in different states. Whenever we got together, it was like time hadn't skipped a beat. Mark was the cousin that when both of us got together, we were definitely about to get into some trouble. In our early teens, during summer break, we would go out to visit our big cousin Yolanda at the University of Central Florida, UCF. She had an apartment right outside of the campus. She was a heavy sleeper, so once we knew she was out, Mark, my brother Reggie, aka Reg, and I would push her car down the street, crank it, and go joyride to Walmart. We managed the 2-mile journey to Walmart without a licensed driver in the car. In fact, no one in the car was old enough even to drive. Anything could have happened to us driving to and from the store that night. However, the fact that Mark and I were together, we felt invincible. One day, while hanging out, we stopped at a gas station and noticed an abandoned purse. It was turned upside down with items scattered around as if someone had been rummaging through it. For a minute, we didn't think anything about it. Then, out of curiosity, my instincts told me to check it out. I decided to grab the purse and began to search through it, finding several books of food stamps. These days, with advancement in technology, books of stamps are comparable to 8-track tapes. I now know the right thing to do would have been to get that bag back to its rightful owner, or at least attempt to do so. However, at the time, I was a big boy that loved to eat, a fat boy that was staring at a couple of $100 in food stamps, and that equaled a lot of groceries. Without hesitation, Mark and I went straight to Save-A-Lot, a local grocery store around the corner from the house. Mark and I were two heavy dudes with heavy appetites on our way to do heavy damage. We walked in, grabbed a shopping cart, and went to work. Sensibly, I began looking for the deals and the store brands, but then Mark reminded me that we were spending stamps, stating, "Boy, if you don't put that stuff back and get the name brand." After that, it was Oreos, the real Oreos, Steakums, and Tyson chicken patties. Nothing but the best. At the time, we were staying with Mark's mom, my Aunt Rose. We knew she would be curious as to where we broke dudes like us came with the money to buy all of those groceries. Immediately, Mark came up with a plan. If she asks where we got the money for the groceries, tell her Uncle George sent you some money so you could get a few things you needed. It never failed. We were always quick on our feet and able to map out a lie within a moment's notice. Until this day, I am not sure if my aunt ever knew the truth, but what I did know was those were some of the best groceries I ever had. Instead of doing the right thing, I chose instant gratification. I took the easy way out and kept the stamps for my selfish gain. Not once did I consider how spending the stamps made the person missing out on the stamps feel. Conviction came once I thoroughly examined my life, thinking to myself, she might have thought to backtrack and return to the store just minutes after Mark and I drove off smiling. Had the owner prayed for the return of her missing stamps? Did she have to go without for a month? Did her starving children cry themselves to sleep as their stomachs growled? I never once stopped to think about them or their mother. If I could somehow turn back the hands of time, I would have either left the bag where it was, took it into the store attendant, or make every attempt to get the bag back to its rightful owner. Unfortunately, at the time, I lacked integrity. I wish it were something that was automatically instilled within us as we reach adulthood. Instead, it is only through deep examination that allows each of us to make a sound and conscious decision to do the right in life, forsaking all opportunities of giving in to selfish gain. It's always easy to do the right thing when someone is looking. The trick to integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Failure is merely an opportunity to begin again more intelligently. Henry Ford. Chapter 10. The best of times, the worst of times. In the summer of 1994, my brother Reg and I packed our bags and left Orlando on Greyhound headed to Radcliffe, Kentucky. We didn't have any concrete plans before arriving, yet our confidence led us to believe the outcome would be positive. In no time, we found an apartment on Elm Street and moved in. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, unfurnished and located on the top floor. We called it the penthouse. The penthouse had plenty of space and even more potential. Thankfully, my mom sent Reg and I a nice check to get us on our feet. A family friend, Miss Elin, like a second mom to me, graciously donated all the furniture we needed for our apartment. The penthouse was ready. You would think invitations were sent to all of our friends. Within a couple of days' time, the penthouse quickly became the kick-it spot. There was always loud noise and partying going on until all hours of the night with our music blasting. Since there were a lot of people over, of course, we took up all the parking spaces. The neighbors would never complain or ask us to move the cars. Instead, they often gave evil looks in passing. After the first 3 months of consistent partying, we received a knock on the door. It was the landlord with an eviction notice, informing us we had 30 days to vacate. We partied 25 of those days away and halfway considered what to do the remaining days. With a day or two to spare, we found an apartment. How lucky could we get? We moved into a 2-story, 4-plex apartment located on Wood Creek Street. This apartment was only 1 street over from our previous apartment. Fortunately, we didn't have to pay for movers or rent a big truck. Our new apartment was close enough to our old apartment that our friends moved everything by hand and foot. We waited until it was dark and carried everything we owned over to the new apartment piece by piece. The biggest challenge we faced was moving everything down 3 flights of stairs from the old apartment and up 1 flight at the new place. With all of the partygoers helping out, we had everything moved within a few hours. It was a late night in a new apartment. Once settled in, we were back to relentless partying. Eventually, the landlord would get word of heavy partying, loitering, and littering going on in his building. Unfortunately for us, it turned out he was from the same leasing agent as the previous apartment. Due to our track record, we were put on temporary probation. After about a month or so, one of the neighbors began to complain about the noise level. What did they expect? We were a bunch of young bachelors who lived to party. Eventually, the landlord came out to investigate for himself. This particular day, there just happened to be several friends visiting, which led the landlord to issue yet another eviction notice. After a careful search of available spots in the area, the crew found the perfect location. We packed our things and moved to 408 Wood Creek Drive, Apartment 1, an apartment located on the first floor directly across the street from the last place. Our new landlord had no affiliation with the previous leasing company, which worked out great. Reg and I signed the lease, got the keys, and called the boys to come help us move. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but over the next few months, the number of residents would increase by more than 15 people at any given time. Due to the increase of residents, our party's potential for trouble grew to another level. Soon our daily routine would be as follows. We would wake up in the morning and head to the gym. After the gym, it was straight to the liquor store. During that time, the drink of choice was primarily malted liquor. However, if we wanted to splurge, it would be a treat to ourselves to Urkel Jerk or Easy Jeezy. E&J for those not old enough to know. After we returned from the liquor store, we would get showered up and start our day of partying. Our partying consisted of drinking, playing spades, and shooting dice. On a really good day of partying, we would move all of the furniture, couch, chairs, and table onto the front lawn and spark up the grill. Our place was out of control to the point there was no telling who would show up. The parties always lasted through the night. On any given night, if there was any club open within 30 miles, we made it our purpose to be there and shut it down. After the club, we would take the after party back to our apartment and continue where we left off. We kept drinking, playing spades, and shooting dice. It was never a thing for someone to walk through the door with a pocket full of money and leave out dead broke. That's just how the dice roll sometimes. I remember on more than one occasion I would be up in a dice game of over $1,000. We called this a come up or hitting a lick. Definition: when a person did something to better his odds, cash flow, or social position. This was always a great position to be in, unless you were the person on the losing end. Many times losing too much money would lead to someone getting into a fight. One time in particular, and one that I will never forget, was during a dice game when one of my crew members, Jerry, won a substantial amount of money from another member, Turk. This loss certainly didn't sit too well with Turk, who looked at Jerry and said with a serious face, "You're going to have to give me some of that money back, or we're going to have to fight." With no hesitation, Jerry replied, "I guess we'll have to fight then." Everyone gathered around as they went at it. To my surprise, Jerry ended up getting the best of Turk and never gave the money back. The fight ended and the dice game continued. This was just another day in the hood. Incidents like this would go on to be the joke of the day for days to come. It was always good for a laugh or two. When it came to women, they were always around in abundance. Somehow, both the spoken and unspoken rule became, don't bring your main girl over to the crib. Once this happened, she became fair game for one of the brothers to scoop her up. Believe me, there were plenty of times when there were disagreements for that very reason. On several occasions, someone outside of our crew would come over exclaiming someone in the house was sleeping with his or her girlfriend, to which we would reply something like, "Well, who is your girl? And did she know she was your girl when she came over here?" There would be so many females coming in and out. I was once questioned about the possibility of me running a prostitute ring. I thought that was funny. Although from the outside looking in, I can now see what the questioning was all about. How could a group of guys live like this? There were so many great memories in this apartment, yet many I would like to forget ever happened. Loud parties, drunk crowds, rowdy dice games, and plenty of women at the kicking spot would lead to a third eviction. Overall, in a year's time, we would go on to be evicted 5 times in apartments within a quarter-mile radius. The word was out, and landlords would no longer rent to us. According to Henry Ford, failure is merely an opportunity to begin again more intelligently. With each failure in the form of eviction, I had the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. Instead, it was more of the same. Parties, women, and gambling led to us being removed from our residence. The power to change the situation was at my disposal, yet I never utilized it. I simply continued to fail. Now, given the various opportunities in life to begin again more intelligently, I take full advantage in doing so. I'll never again view failure as I once did. Do you care whether you live or die? Menace to Society. Chapter 11. A Matter of Life and Death. How could I ever forget the incident with Mad Dog? He was the brother of one of my partners who had recently been released from prison. You could tell he was a pure thug, but he was cool. He hung out with us for a couple of weeks and seemed to fit right in. On this particular night, after an evening of partying, Mad Dog ended up crashing on Michelle's living room floor. Michelle is a lifelong friend and the mother of my godson, Devon. The next morning, when my godson awoke, the curiosity of this 1 year old led him to what he thought was a toy. Unknowingly, it was Mad Dog's loaded gun that he carelessly left lying on the floor. Michelle came around the corner while Devon was holding the gun and totally lost it. She woke Mad Dog up screaming, "Motherfucker, if you don't get your fucking ass out of my house right now, I'm gonna shoot you in your ass with your gun." When she drove around to my apartment that afternoon to tell me what happened, I didn't think it would be an excellent idea if he came around anymore. However, Mad Dog still thought Michelle owed him an explanation. Later on that day, Mad Dog came out of nowhere and began confronting Michelle. I was sitting on the front stoop and couldn't believe what I saw. I heard him calling her all kinds of bitches and whores as he waved his pistol in her face. At the time, Michelle was being terrorized. She was also holding Devon in her arms. Without hesitation, I immediately jumped between Michelle and the gun. With a lump in my throat, I said, "I can't let you do that, Mad Dog." In an instant, I found myself staring down the barrel of a 9mm handgun. I can assure you, finding myself in this position led me to understand the meaning of your life flashing before your eyes. I was relieved when he lowered the gun, looked me in the eye and said, "Big G, I don't have no beef with you." He put away the gun and walked off. I never saw Mad Dog again after that day, and life went on as usual. When I reflect on his memory, the movie Menace to Society comes to mind. The main character, 18-year-old Kane, was asked by his grandfather, "Do you care if you live or die?" Throughout the movie, Kane was depicted as a menace and lived a reckless life. At the end of the film, Kane was shot and blood came from his mouth. As he lay in a pool of blood, Kane begins to reflect on his grandfather's question. Struggling with his final breaths, Kane admits, "I had done too much to turn back and too much to go on. I guess, in the end, it all catched up with me." Kane then finally answered his grandfather's question and said, "Yeah, I do, but now it's too late." I've often wondered if I was living on borrowed time. What would have happened if the situation with Mad Dog had turned fatal? Did I care if I lived or died? Yes, I did. I feel that every day above ground is a testament to that fact. Today is a great day to be alive. We must wake up and enjoy our great fortune before it's too late. You got the body of a Greek god, but you're scared. Coach Joe Jaggers. Chapter 12. Nothing of fear but fear itself. There I was, between classes, playing around in the high school gymnasium when I heard shouts from Coach Jaggers. Coach Joe Jaggers was one of the most all-time winning coaches in the state of Kentucky's history. Over his 33-year coaching career, he managed to win over 290 games and 5 state championships with 2 different schools. I remember Coach most for the impact he had on my life. It all started on the day he called me out for being loud and obnoxious, which was usually the case. He began talking about my size and how I didn't have what it took to play football. What are you, about 6'1", 225 pounds? But you're sorry, too scared to come out on the field with real athletes. The conversation went intensely back and forth for several minutes, right up until the bell rang. Before leaving the gym, Coach issued me a challenge I couldn't refuse. It wasn't in my nature to walk away from a dare. He challenged me to come out for the team, and I accepted. Neither Coach Jaggers nor any of the players thought I would follow through with the challenge. I could see the look of shock and disbelief on their faces as I walked out into the field ready for practice. I will admit I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't allow the coach to prove me wrong. I gave half-hearted efforts up until the moment I knew Coach Jaggers was watching. These were the moments when I would go all out. One day, as Coach was working with the linemen, he called me out once again. During one of his drills, he assigned me the position of running back. I thought to myself, this was my chance to show him just how fast I was. I had to attempt to break through two defenders. What I didn't know was that they were two of the best in the state that year. Shane Beck and Fa Falassi, with a combined weight of well over 700 pounds, were the chosen opposition I had to break through. What I also didn't know was I was to lie on my back until the whistle blew. As the whistle blew, I was to roll over, grab, and tuck the ball, and proceed at full speed through this colossal fortress, also known as Shane and Fa. With the coach and fellow linemen looking on, I did just that. As I met these two gatekeepers with all my might, it just wasn't quite enough to penetrate. I was stood straight up and slammed aggressively to the ground. As the drill would usually go, we would swap out defenders and the running back. The coach had his mind made up to prove his point. He had his agenda, and I wanted to prove him wrong. He insisted on keeping me as the running back and Shane and Fa on the opposing side of the ball. We ran the drill an additional 10 to 15 times until the coach blew the whistle for a break. I was exhausted. The next word out of his mouth would later haunt me for years to come, but would eventually change and add value to my life. Casey, you have the body of a Greek god, but you're scared. These words caught me off guard. I could agree with the body of a Greek god, no argument there. In fact, I was thinking the same thing just that morning as I passed the mirror and caught a glance at my awesome physique. I must admit, I was kind of Greek god-like. The second parts of his statement are the words that have stuck with me the longest. You're scared. It took me many years and plenty of courage to finally look beyond my ego to see his statement as the truth. Through careful consideration of Coach's words as well as a deep self-explanation, I was able to confirm that it was in fact fear that has kept me from achieving my best over the years. I agree with Marianne Williamson, who said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." It's our deep fear that holds us back in life the most. I found myself locked in mediocrity with the key at my disposal the whole time. I remember I would see glimpses of greatness in me and that I was suppressed because I just didn't have enough courage to believe I could be great. There was always that little voice inside that would continually remind me I wasn't worthy of greatness. The same voice convinced me not even to try. The voice assured me I wasn't anything but not good enough, not small enough, not strong enough. The voice assured me that I was anything but worthy to be great. This voice has journeyed along with me over the years and has remained true to its character. Often when I'm en route to a speaking engagement, the voice is there to remind me I'm not good enough. No one is going to listen to me, and I have nothing intelligent to say. When I hear this intimidating voice, I override it with thoughts of worthiness, ideas of greatness, and thoughts of I am powerful beyond measure. I always take a deep breath right before I go on stage. I remind myself that public speaking is the number one fear, even above death. People would rather die than speak in public. I take one more deep breath and tell myself, if you can become a Marine, you can do anything. Then I go for it. I usually don't find my rhythm until about the first 30 seconds to a minute, and then I'm in my zone. I acknowledge the fear and I conquer it. Is fear real? Many agree, as the acronym FEAR suggests, that it is no more than false evidence appearing real. Although I can fully agree with the false evidence part, I cannot help when it comes to the appearing real. Once imagined, fear becomes very realistic. Fear is the single most destructive force in the human mind. It can rob us of our highest potential and can lead to mediocre thinking. It also leads to medical conditions such as high blood pressure, headaches, and even depression. Under the umbrella of fear are worry, doubt, judgment, jealousy, stress, self-pity, and uncertainty. This mental slavery held me captive under my free will for years. Whether fear of failing, fear of rejection, or fear of death, our initial step in combating this enslavement is to identify our fear. Once identified, we must begin replacing our fears with everything that opposes it. Things like desire, faith, enthusiasm, hope, and a positive self-image should always be our goal. We must conquer our fears by all means and not the other way around. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here. Muhammad Ali. Chapter 13. Birds of a Feather. W. Clement Stone once said, "Be careful the environment you choose, for it will shape you. Be careful the friends you choose, for you will become like them." Upon my self-examination, these words would ring true as I began to reflect on a time one of my partners came to me with an idea for a quick come-up. Translation: a fast way to get into trouble. He knew some drug dealers that would be an easy target. The idea was to recruit a couple of members. Needing only 2 more people, I recruited the big boy on the block, Seti B. He was 6'2", 230 pounds, pitch black skin, and dangerous. He was one of those people that you wouldn't want to be surprised by in a dark alley. The crew was set and the plan was in motion. However, it was a very sketchy one. We arrived at the spot, and that's when things got real. There was a knock at the door, and our mob enters, gun first. I mean, literally. There were 5 of us. There was only 1 gun, 3 bullets, and no clip. What a bad combination. The idea was, with 2 big jokers like Seti B and me, once they saw the gun, they would follow the idea. Everyone in the house would do as instructed. We ordered everyone to lay face down on the floor, but with more explicit, aggressive, and detailed wording. My partner knew where the stash was and grabbed it immediately. I began to search their pockets as they laid face down. Upon searching the 4th person's pocket, I noticed that more people had come from the back. I could have had a heart attack then. I thought we had everyone in the house accounted for and in plain sight. After I had the goods in my pocket, I kept hearing someone in the corner continuously farting, to the point that I couldn't take it anymore. Without thinking, I yelled, "Hey, what's all that damn farting about?" It was funny to everyone but me, as this was no time for jokes. Nonetheless, we quickly collected all that we came for and ran out of there as fast as possible. It wouldn't be long before the victims would regain their bearing and immediately storm out the house with guns blazing. Fortunately, everybody made it back to the car safe and we drove off. There was enough silence to hear a pin drop. Then Seti B asked, "Big G, what were you thinking when you asked him what's all that farting about?" We all began to bust out laughing. I laughed and laughed the whole while thinking how nervous I had been. I was just as nervous as the guy farting, to the point where I cut a few of my own. However, this eased the tension. This would be the ongoing joke over the next several weeks. "Big G, what's all that farting about?" Then everyone busted out laughing. During the ride back to the house, we began dividing up the items. I came an eye on everyone and noticed everyone wasn't being honest, so I didn't put everything I had in the pot either. Imagine that. No honor amongst thieves. Everything identified in the pot was clearly not everything retrieved from the house. Money and weed were the only items put in the pot, but it was enough for a come up. Shortly after, Seti B and I became small-time weed distributors. We started getting our wardrobe together and spending irresponsibly on food, drinks, entertainment, and balled out for a few weeks. Not to mention, we were indulging in our product. When the weed was gone, we were right back to being broke. I've always been told, show me who your friends are and I'll tell you your future. I never quite understood this until my mind became mature enough to grasp the concept. Who we chose to associate ourselves with is a great predictor as to who we will become. I think about my crew and all of the get-rich-quick schemes. The path we were traveling usually comes with only one or two possible endings: prison or the grave. I was able to escape both, but not without a cost. It's been said, to whom much is given, much is required. I couldn't agree more. Looking over my reckless life, it seems I should be under prison. However, intervention would dictate a higher purpose for my life, but not without a price. The cost of my tuition here on earth is paid through my service to others. I carry my stories with me as my scarlet letter. As at times, I will volunteer in prisons and share my words of encouragement, knowing the only thing that separates us is the fact that at the end of the day, I am free to go as I please. I also go into high schools and I picture my younger self sitting in the bleachers listening to me. I want to give them the right information to serve them throughout life. When I speak to military organization, I speak with courage and enthusiasm as I can attest firsthand to the difference the Marine Corps has made in my life. Speaking to church groups, I allow myself to be transparent as I attest to the awesome God I serve. In life, we'll all go through our own personal struggles in discovering our inner greatness. When we receive our blows and realize we are still standing, we have to ask ourselves, why? In my examination, I have found my why. I once asked God, what would he have me to do? The answer I received was, be of service. Without a shadow of a doubt, I believe my purpose in life is to be of service to others. This is the rent for my room here. Look at a man the way that he is, and he only becomes worse. But look at him as if he were what he could be, and then he becomes what he should be. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Chapter 14. The Talk. Luck had run out. An eviction notice was served from our apartment management for the 5th time. At this point, the crew began going their separate ways as my immediate circle dwindled down to Jermaine, Mike, and myself. We were like the three amigos. By this time, we've now graduated to selling crack. Not enough to become kings of New York, but enough to get us by. The eviction transitioned our living quarters to a broken down 1981 Pontiac Bonneville in the neighborhood. The change of seasons was quickly approaching. With the weather getting cold, our new living arrangements created more challenges. We would sell drugs, scheme during the daylight hours, and mostly just hang out as late as we possibly could to ensure fewer hours in the Bonneville. Often, we had enough money to stay in a hotel, but would choose to grind it out. Besides, the nights didn't last long enough for us to get too uncomfortable. The plan was to earn enough money to relocate, and we did, to Hinesville, Georgia. When the three amigos arrived in Hinesville, we had enough money to live comfortably while plotting our next unlawful act. We eventually checked into a suite, paying for a full week in advance. This routine became what we refer to as the plan. After having a couple of drinks to get comfortable, it was time to hit the club. We would continue to pour drink after drink, party, and enjoy ourselves night after night until we came to the end of our prepaid week. The party was over, forcing us to rethink our strategy. I was down to my last resort searching for my next place to stay, my cousin Dee Dee's house. She lived in Hinesville, and as much as I didn't want to bother her, I didn't want to sleep outside in the cold again. I went to my cousin's house explaining my situation as she sat there listening and shaking her head in disbelief. I explained to her that Mike, who she knew was not my biological brother, was indeed my brother and needed a place to stay as well. Dee Dee agreed reluctantly and then went to the kitchen and prepared a warm homemade meal for us. She served fried chicken, green beans, cornbread, and macaroni and cheese. She showed us real Southern hospitality. We ate plenty, watched a little TV, took showers, and went to sleep in real beds, not the cold leather of the Bonneville. Dee Dee, the next day when I woke up and went downstairs to the kitchen where I found my cousin preparing breakfast, she told me how my situation bothered her and how she didn't sleep well from worrying about me. We sat down at the dining room table and she asked me something that would go on to change the future course of my life. There was something about the way she looked at me which let me know what she was about to say next was very important. It felt as if she were looking straight through me, directly to my soul. She looked at me as if I was less than I was supposed to be. I felt embarrassed. The way she looked at me, I knew she expected more of me. And somewhere deep down, I knew I could do better. I could feel the concern as she asked me, "What are you going to do with your life?" I had heard this question many times before. Never had it resonated as it did this particular time. As I absorbed the question my cousin asked me, I searched deep within inside myself, but could not find an answer. I didn't have a clue until, finally, I remembered meeting with the GI Sergeant, Gunnery Sergeant Freeman, the Marine Corps recruiter I met in Kentucky during the summer. Sharing my intentions of joining the Marines seemed to be a good idea. So I blurted out to Dee Dee, "I thought about joining the Marines. I may do that." I watched as my cousin's face lit up while my last statement sunk in. She looked at me yet again, and I could feel the piercing from her eyes. She stopped me and said, "No, don't think about it. Do it. You need the military right now to give you some structure in your life." I explained to her that I had a warrant for my arrest in Kentucky because I missed a court date for failure to appeal or failure to pay on a noise ordinance citation from one of the many apartments we were evicted from. The warrant carried a fee attached to it for $350. I didn't have much money to my name, let alone 350 big ones. At that moment, Dee Dee grabbed her checkbook and wrote out a check for the entire fee amount. She said, "You take this money and go pay the fine. Get your name cleared, and please go into the Marine Corps. It will do you some good." Little did my cousin know the positive effect that day impacted my life. Her words of wisdom, the $350 and genuine love showed to me, saved my life. Despite having heard similar advice to join the military from other individuals, Mrs. Lewis, my high school counselor, my parents, various friends, etc., Dee Dee's voice managed to pierce through my prideful walls. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Maya Angelou. And I often think about this turning point in my life, as my life would have turned out horribly if my cousin hadn't had spoke with conviction. She provided the foresight to guide me down the right path. With no direction and no definite plan in life, I was no more than a drifter, like a ship with no sail, sitting in the middle of the ocean. The outcome was not going to be good. I was headed nowhere fast as I continued to drift through life on a course towards self-destruction. Many times I found myself drifting through life with no definite plan. I left my destiny to chance. I relied on the trials and tribulations of the storms, strong winds to push me through on my journey instead of propelling myself with knowledge and action. This is how my destination became a desolate land. My lack of a plan caused me to be frustrated and disappointed when I arrived at a destination. Leaving my destiny to chance was an instance I couldn't afford to take lightly. Achieving greatness is never by chance, it is always by choice. You must start by asking yourself, what are you going to do with your life? Although anyone can ask this question, you are the only person that can answer it. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2, the King James Version Bible. Chapter 15, Pushing Forward. I arrived at Parris Island, South Carolina, where United States Marines are made. I knew this would be by far one of my most challenging endeavors, so I tried both mentally and physically to hype myself up for the challenge. That is, up until the first day of physical training, PT. In order to begin training, we had to pass an initial strength test, or IST, successfully. The test consisted of a minimum of 2 pull-ups and no less than 35 sit-ups within 2 minutes, as well as completing a 1.5 mile run in less than 13 minutes and 30 seconds. Pull-ups, no problem. Sit-ups, easy day. 1.5 mile run, oh hell no. I knew going into it I wasn't a very good runner. Hell, I wasn't even a decent athlete. My only experience with running was when something or someone was chasing me. As I suspected, I didn't complete the first mile without needing to stop. I gave it my all and then some. Having to stop so many times, I was ordered by the drill instructors to get in the back of the Humvee with all of the other non-hackers. We were sent to what is known as the Physical Conditioning Platoon, or PCP, but recognized affectionately by the recruits as pork chop platoon. The scariest thing was I did not know what to expect. There I was walking into an open squad bay filled with recruits who were obviously in the same physical condition as I was. It was later explained to us that to resume training, we would have to pass the IST 2 consecutive times successfully. The tests were administered once a week. Here's the kicker. While in PCP, none of the time would count toward the 12 weeks of recruit training. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay in there long. After lights out, with all the recruits in their racks, I uttered a silent prayer to God. The prayer started out, God, if you're listening, I need your help. There's no way I'm going to be able to do this without you. I started praying every morning and night. Often I'd say a little prayer to myself as my drill instructor reminded me how badly he wanted to bust my freaking heart. At that point, I knew I wanted out of there. I woke up the next morning preparing for my first IST. I said my prayers and was off to the races. All of the recruits lined up and waited for the whistle to blow. I said yet another prayer. Please, God, I need you to be with me more than ever. I stopped a lot, but just long enough to catch my breath. I was determined that the physical conditioning platoon was not the place for me. I must have had God's direct line that day because immediately my prayers were answered. I barely passed the first IST, but fortunately for me, passed was the operative word. My mind was made up. Nothing was going to stop me from passing the next test. Right before the second IST, a recruit pulled me to the side and said, Casey, I always pass the run and the sit-ups. My problem is getting past the pull-ups. Pace yourself with me, and I will get you through the run. I thought this was a sure thing, so I did it. Up until the point where the recruit started to fall back drastically from the pace he set for us. I knew I couldn't let this hold me back, so I began pushing forward. I eventually left my pace setter behind and went on to successfully complete my second IST. Passing the second initial strength test allowed me to start training officially. For several months, I was assigned to 1st Recruit Battalion, Bravo Company Platoon 1069. I remember settling into the squad bay on the first day of training. The fear of the unknown kept me on high alert, as I didn't know what to expect. I had been on the island a couple of weeks and I witnessed the routine a couple of times. I figured I'd be prepared for what was next. Boy, was I wrong. I recall a fairly calm setting. There were several drill instructors flanked on either side. An instructor spoke to the platoon as he wrapped up, his last words were, Drill instructors, you got 'em? That's when all hell broke out. Every drill instructor in the room went on a rampage. It was as if a whirlwind began ripping through the squad bay. The scene would set the tone for the next few months. You were fed a lot of information very fast, and you have to process it all and move at the same time. By design, I quickly learned from everything I did. Learning later, there was a method to the madness. While on Paris Island, it seemed as if I was miles away from civilization. The fact that those were the holiday months made it that much harder. One night, I remember in particular during what's known as Phase 2 in boot camp, we were at the rifle range preparing to qualify as Marine marksmen. That night, I lay down and watched the clock as I counted down the new year. 3, 2, 1. I began hearing Happy New Year throughout the squad bay. It wasn't loud enough for any of the drill instructors to hear, but I heard it. I began to wonder what everyone in the real world must have been doing as the ball dropped. If I knew my crew, they rented out a few hotel rooms and threw a New Year's bash. I imagined all the women at the party and what they might have been wearing. It had been over a month since I saw a woman, so I also imagined the sweet fragrance she had on as well. I pictured my crew drinking, smoking, partying, and having a good time. I envisioned myself being home partying with the fellas, and for just a few brief seconds, I was home, celebrating the new year with my crew as the ball dropped. As I opened my eyes, I was right back to reality and the whispers of Happy New Year throughout the squad bay. That night was the last time that I would think about the crew and what they were doing back home. I had to temporarily remove them from my memory to concentrate on why I left in the first place. I thought about the journey that had brought me to Paris Island and what I had hoped to achieve there. It was at that moment I knew for sure I wanted to be a Marine no matter what it took. I began to challenge myself and push past the limitations in my mind. I was blown away when I started seeing results. Not a whole lot at first, but enough for me to tell. I watched in the mirror as the six-pack began forming where my keg used to be. I was inspired by the results and wondered what else I could achieve. I pushed on as my thoughts moved from questioning my greatness to wondering just how great I could become. I went from wondering how long I would last in boot camp to being determined that nothing was going to stop me from being a Marine. I challenged my limits as often as I could, and eventually my efforts paid off. On February 23rd, 1996, I graduated Marine Corps boot camp, earning the title of United States Marine. My drill instructors, Sergeant Hilson, Sergeant Nelson, Sergeant Stuhlman, and senior drill instructor Sergeant Adams all saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. They saw fit for my rites of passage to become a United States Marine. So much of who I am today is thanks to my Marine drill instructors and the recruits of Platoon 1069. I often tell people, if you can become a Marine, you can be anything you want. The values it took to become a Marine are the same values it will take to be successful in any venture: honor, courage, and commitment. To have honor is to have uncompromising integrity, to be accountable for your actions, and to have respect for others. To have courage is to lead by example. It has the mental and physical strength to do what is right while navigating through tough challenges and mastering fear. To have commitment, one must be dedicated, determined, and always disciplined and strive for self-mastery and excellence. Don't fall victim to mediocrity. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. The greatness to want more, be more, and have more is in you. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Write your goals down in detail and read your list of goals every day. This will keep your subconscious mind focused on what you want step by step. Jack Canfield. Chapter 16. Reflections and Lessons Learned. George is always coming to class unprepared. He has no paper, pencil, book, workbook, or homework. These were the words written on my progress report mailed to my parents. Mrs. Allgood, my introduction to business teacher, went on to note, George is failing. Lack of effort shown on work handed in, talks too much in class, pays little or no attention in class, failure to turn in all homework assignments, and lack of participation in class. I remember like it was yesterday. The school year was winding down and I had a 63% average. It was time to take our final exam, so I began to study. I quickly realized there was no way I was going to retain all this information required to pass my test. Nonetheless, I continued studying. Only moments later, my thoughts were confirmed. There were definitely no way I would pass this test. I was going to be impossible for me to remember all the information by the next day. I was desperate. I had to think fast. I got it. I decided to make a cheat sheet with everything I thought would be on the test. I began preparing my cheat sheet, writing extra small so I can include plenty of questions and answers. I stayed up most of the night writing and reading, but mostly writing. The next day, Mrs. Allgood passed out the exam. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew for sure I was ready. I had my cheat sheet in place. It was positioned perfectly, so when the time was right, I could look down and search for the correct answers. I responded to the first question with no problem and without the use of my cheat sheet, followed by the second and the third question, again no problem. Fourth, fifth, eighth. Okay, I will admit I had to make an educated guess on a couple of the questions, but for the most part, I knew the answers. I breezed through the test and even had time to go back and review all of my replies. Time's up, Miss Allgood called out as she walked around collecting our exams. I handed in my test with confidence, knowing I did my best. I was a little too confident, perhaps. In all of my excitement, I bumped my desk, revealing my master plan, my cheat sheet. I was busted. Immediately, I went into defense mode. Mr. Allgood, please let me explain, I cried out. I came here today with every intention of cheating, but when I had the test in front of me, I knew most of the answers. Even though Miss Allgood appreciated the fact I was honest, she certainly had to punish my lack of integrity. To my surprise, Mr. Allgood granted me the opportunity I needed. She allowed me to retake the exam. Ms. Allgood also advised she would deduct points due to the poor choice I had made by using my cheat sheet. I retook the test. This time not even a thought of a cheat sheet entered my mind. I did better than I did the first time. When the final score was tallied, and even after subtracting the points, my last score was 88. This brought my final grade for the semester to a D. That worked for me. I passed. I have often thought about the cheat sheet I used that day. I recently thought about how much time, effort, and energy I put into it. Who knew the repetition of reading out loud and writing down would contribute to my retention of the information? I have since found that by reading the information out loud, it allows the information to sink into my subconscious mind. Additionally, when I had taken the time to write it down, it reinforced the information and helped me to retain it. Taking the time to write down my goals and read them out loud daily gave me the edge in achieving any goal I have set forth. Doing this kept information at the forefront of my drive and kept its attainment always fresh on my mind. No paper, pencil, book, workbook, or homework. Wow. Looking back, I wasn't prepared. I have since learned that when it comes to achievement, it's always best to write it down, lock it to memory, and work towards its attainment. According to Jack Canfield, writing it down helps you keep your subconscious mind focused on what you want. Often, I write my goals down and repeat them aloud several times a day. This might sound silly at first and may even feel silly, but I assure you it works. The repetition of this process begins to lock the information into the subconscious mind, which is always operating on your behalf. Consider for a moment how many times you have written your name down and how many times you have said it out loud to yourself. Through this process, we have been programmed through the subconscious mind to be alerted when we hear our names. This is the very reason why we miss entire conversations except for when anything sounds close to our name is being mentioned. We go off and swear that the person was talking about us. Remember, always on your behalf. The lesson learned in Mrs. Allgood's class years ago was no exception to the rule. As I pulled my cheat sheet out prepared to use it, I began going through the test questions, and my subconscious mind recognized the correct questions and answer pairs. The same has been true when it comes to writing down my goals. Once I locked the information to my subconscious mind, it immediately began working on my behalf to accomplish the goal. Since it is not granted us to live long, let us transmit to posterity some memorial that we have at least lived. Pliny the Younger. Chapter 17, The Last Amigos. August 2nd, 1997 is a date I would never forget. This was the day I learned the terrible fate of my good friend Mike, aka Lowe. I learned my good friend had been shot and killed. That moment was very surreal to me because only days earlier I had spoken with Lowe. I told him I would be going on leave in 1 week and coming to Radcliffe to visit. This was going to be a very exciting time as I had not hung out with my friend since the three amigos parted ways and I joined the Marine Corps. I got off the phone looking forward to seeing all of my buddies. As the days went by, the anticipation grew. Until that dreadful day. I received a phone call early in the morning from Michelle. She told the horrifying story of how my good friend Lowe was murdered. She gave me the word on the street and included the names of the people involved. As Michelle ran down the list of names, I recognized and personally knew the individuals involved, as we were all involved in the same inner circle. The accounts received from Michelle, as well as from others, made the shooting sound like a setup. The story that seemed consistent was, Lowe was riding in the vehicle with two other men when the driver stated he had to pee. From there, all of the stories got sketchy as to who pulled the trigger. The why is still unknown today. In true Lowe fashion, I was told that my friend's last words were, "That's okay, I'm still about it." I later found out this was a popular song at the time by Master P. From that day on, every time I heard the song, I was reminded of my good friend Lowe. A few days after hearing of the murder, I went on leave and was back in Radcliffe, Kentucky. I mustered up just enough confidence to attend the wake, but not enough to participate in the actual funeral services. As I looked into the coffin and saw my friend laying there motionless and not breathing, I was having trouble believing what I was seeing. The last time I saw this guy, he was full of energy and life. He was the kind of stand-up guy that would give you his last. I couldn't imagine one reason that someone would want to see him dead. Jermaine also attended the services for Lowe that day. I never told him, but Jay was like the big brother to me. We met in the 6th grade and remained close friends ever since. In fact, on many occasions, we would tell people we met that we were brothers. Whenever we were together, I knew I never had to worry about anything. If something went down, he always had my back. I felt helpless as I looked at Jay at the funeral. I could tell that a part of him had died on that wet day as well. Jay and Lowe had hooked back up after our Hinesville, Georgia days and remained close friends as brothers. Jay was never the same after that day. I think he somehow blamed himself for Lowe's death. Not that it was his fault, but just the fact that he wasn't there to possibly prevent the shooting from happening. I would still see Jay from time to time, and people would share how he seemed to come alive whenever I was around, However, to me, he just wasn't the same mentally. When we saw each other, we would always reminisce about the old days that always included Low. Jermaine passed on December 21st, 2011, from heart complications, just 2 days after his 37th birthday. Thinking about my two brothers gone too soon reminds me just how short life is. From time to time, I post their picture on Facebook with an RIP message. For many, these two have long been forgotten. As for me, I often think about my amigos, those cold nights in Redcliffe and the pitfalls in Hinesville. I also reflect on a time we spent together, learning about life. How we discussed one day we would do something with ourselves, be somebody, and change the world. I take our dream of changing the world with me on every stage I walk on. I carry the idea with me to every prison I enter, as well as every high school, college, and youth organization. I tell audiences my stories and of struggles I went through just trying to navigate through this thing we call life. I share with them the dream of three misguided youth, the dream which now only lives in me, the last of the Amigos. It's not the situation, but whether we react negative or respond positive to the situation that is important. Zig Ziglar. Chapter 18, The Road Less Traveled. It was April 2000, and I had fulfilled my contractual commitment in the Marine Corps. The time had come for me to ease on down the road. I received my honorable discharge papers, and I was about to hit the highway. My last day in Yuma, Arizona was bittersweet. There was the excitement of me getting out, but there was also the nervousness and fear of what was to come. There's always that little feeling of uncertainty, especially when there is no definite plan in place. I only knew that I was getting out and heading to Florida. The fellas in my crew threw me a little going away bash. During the celebration, my partner, Ant, pulled me to the side and asked if I had some heat, firearm, to take with me on the long trip. I told him no, and he stated, I can't let you make the trip without one. I have an extra pistol I'm going to give you. Knowing I had the pistol with me on my long journey to the East Coast, just in case, indeed made me feel a little more comfortable. I relocated to Jacksonville, Florida, where I reconnected with my now ex-wife, AP, short for April. I met AP, also a Marine, shortly after reporting for duty to Yuma Air Station, and not long after we got married. We never really got along as husband and wife for any length of time, but as friends, we were the 98 Bonnie and Clyde duo. AP got out the corpse before I did, and because we were in the process of a divorce, she moved back home to Jacksonville. We would still talk on the phone from time to time, and as time grew near for me to get out of the court, we even talked about the possibility of me moving back to Jacksonville and giving us another try. AP and I had just moved into our London town apartment and decided to invite a few friends over. Those friends invited some more friends, and before we knew it, a party had formed. We were doing what we both love to do, entertain and play cards. I noticed that one of the guests, some friend of a friend, was getting out of order. He made himself just a little too comfortable with AP to the point of disrespect. Even AP became uncomfortable, quickly pointing out that I was her man. The individual eventually came over and introduced himself. The gentlemanly thing would have been to just shake his hand, smile, and say nothing. Since I had a couple of drinks and was feeling good, I replied, I was wondering how long you were going to disrespect me in my house. He must have felt a certain way as the comment caused a commotion where several words were exchanged. The guy had a couple of his friends with him, and of course, I had a few of my own on deck as well. I remember one of the last things the guy said before he left was, "Let's go. I hate to see a nigga get knocked out in his own house." I laughed to myself because years ago this might have been something that I would have said. In the heat of the moment, I went into my bedroom to get my pistol. I was a little hesitant at first, but in my mind, I rationalized the situation had escalated and gone too far, too fast. Without hesitation, I grabbed the gun. Just a few short minutes later, in front of our building, I could hear shots fired as the guy I had words with and his friends proceeded to shoot their pistols in the air as they drove off. While cocking the hammer back on the pistol that night, I looked over and caught a glance of myself in the mirror. Between my reflection in the mirror and the evil feeling taking over my body, I had the cold steel in my hand, knowing this was not for me. It was that uncontrollable feeling of being out of control which caused me to give the pistol away the very next day. My personal choices began to get better along my journey on the road less traveled. Years ago, this was not a decision I would have ever thought, let alone a decision I'd make. In the heat of the moment, my natural inclination was to strike first and ask questions later. In this case, I could have reacted negatively. That night could have gone several different ways, with some not ending in my favor. I have learned in many situations it's not the person, or it's the person with the level head and positive response that usually prevails. Given the choice to react or respond, I chose to respond. Man is where he is so that he may learn, that he may grow. James Allen. Chapter 19. No such thing as coincidence. In 2005, I received a call from my dad. "Hey son, I just found out that you have an uncle that you didn't know you had. His name is Sonny, and he lives right there in Jacksonville." My dad gave me his phone number and I immediately called him. We spoke for a little while and introduced ourselves. It turned out he stayed on the west side of Jacksonville as well, and not too far from where I lived. It was a little late in the evening, so I told him that I would stop by on my way home from work the next day. The next day seemed to drag on as I looked forward to meeting my uncle for the very first time. I pulled up in his driveway as he was sitting in the garage with a drink in hand. Although we had never met before, within the first 5 minutes it was like we had known each other all our lives. We exchanged war stories and how we came to live in Jacksonville, Florida. The conversation went on and I discovered we were both Marines. Of course, that simply made our bond tighter. Uncle Sonny went on to say after getting out of the Corps, he went on to become a U.S. Treasury agent. He even went on to tell me of some of the assignments as an agent, including when he did security for Jesse Jackson. After retiring as an agent, Uncle Sonny moved to Jacksonville, and while getting his house built, he stayed at Gregory West's apartment in 2001. Coincidentally, I also lived there during the same time period. We hit it off and grew to be great friends. Imagine having an uncle you didn't know you had, and years later, by happenstance, you both have birthdays in August, both served honorably in the United States Marine Corps, both years later find their way to Jacksonville, Florida, both lived in the same apartment complex, and during the same exact time period, to not know the other even existed until decades later was an amazing concept. Some might call this a coincidence. I say it's God doing some of his best work. In the years to follow, Uncle Sonny and I shared great memories together. I spent most of my free time hanging out at his house, in fact, almost every day. Just as fast as chance reveals hidden treasures, at the very same speed they can be taken away. It was with great sadness I remembered walking into my uncle's hospice room, seeing him hooked up to a breathing machine with all sorts of tubes. It was a tough sight to see. I walked into the room filled with saddened family and friends comforting one another. My uncle just lay there gasping with every breath. I secretly prayed with that the doctors were wrong and that there was still a chance that Unc would pull through. Deep down, however, I knew that those were the final hours. I knew that I would have to find somehow to the peace with the situation I faced. I left the hospice center that day having barely spoken to my uncle. In my spirit, there was a feeling of unease. It bothered me all throughout the following workday as I prayed that God would allow me one last conversation with my Uncle Sonny. My prayer was swiftly answered. On June 16th, 2008, I was blessed with an opportunity to have the conversation of a lifetime. I sat there by my uncle's bedside and watched as he continued to struggle with each breath. I spoke to him as I had many times before. At the end of our conversation, I told him I loved him and he would always be in my prayers. A couple of hours after leaving, I received a phone call from my cousin Karen, who delivered the news that Unc had passed. Somehow, having a chance to meet him, a chance to get to know him, and a chance to speak with him one last time brought me to a calm and peace. I was saddened to have lost him, yet appreciative of the memories we created. Write your goals down in detail and read your list of goals every day. This will keep your subconscious mind focused on what you want step by step. Jack Canfield. Chapter 16. Reflections and Lessons Learned. George is always coming to class unprepared. He has no paper, pencil, book, workbook, or homework. These were the words written on my progress report mailed to my parents. Mrs. Allgood, my introduction to business teacher, went on to note, George is failing. Lack of effort shown on work handed in, talks too much in class, pays little or no attention in class, failure to turn in all homework assignments, and lack of participation in class. I remember like it was yesterday. The school year was winding down and I had a 63% average. It was time to take our final exam, so I began to study. I quickly realized there was no way I was going to retain all this information required to pass my test. Nonetheless, I continued studying. Only moments later, my thoughts were confirmed. There were definitely no way I would pass this test. I was going to be impossible for me to remember all the information by the next day. I was desperate. I had to think fast. I got it. I decided to make a cheat sheet with everything I thought would be on the test. I began preparing my cheat sheet, writing extra small so I can include plenty of questions and answers. I stayed up most of the night writing and reading, but mostly writing. The next day, Mrs. Allgood passed out the exam. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew for sure I was ready. I had my cheat sheet in place. It was positioned perfectly, so when the time was right, I could look down and search for the correct answers. I responded to the first question with no problem and without the use of my cheat sheet, followed by the second and the third question, again no problem. Fourth, fifth, eighth. Okay, I will admit I had to make an educated guess on a couple of the questions, but for the most part, I knew the answers. I breezed through the test and even had time to go back and review all of my replies. Time's up, Miss Allgood called out as she walked around collecting our exams. I handed in my test with confidence, knowing I did my best. I was a little too confident, perhaps. In all of my excitement, I bumped my desk, revealing my master plan, my cheat sheet. I was busted. Immediately, I went into defense mode. "Mr. Allgood, please let me explain," I cried out. "I came here today with every intention of cheating, but when I had the test in front of me, I knew most of the answers." Even though Miss Allgood appreciated the fact I was honest, she certainly had to punish my lack of integrity. To my surprise, Mr. Allgood granted me the opportunity I needed. She allowed me to retake the exam. Ms. Allgood also advised she would deduct points due to the poor choice I had made by using my cheat sheet. I retook the test. This time, not even a thought of a cheat sheet entered my mind. I did better than I did the first time. When the final score was tallied, and even after subtracting the points, my last score was 88. This brought my final grade for the semester to a D. That worked for me. I passed. I have often thought about the cheat sheet I used that day. I recently thought about how much time, effort, and energy I put into it. Who knew the repetition of reading out loud and writing down would contribute to my retention of the information? I have since found that by reading the information out loud, it allows the information to sink into my subconscious mind. Additionally, when I had taken the time to write it down, it reinforced the information and helped me to retain it. Taking the time to write down my goals and read them out loud daily gave me the edge in achieving any goal I have set forth. Doing this kept information at the forefront of my drive and kept its attainment always fresh on my mind. No paper, pencil, book, workbook, or homework. Wow. Looking back, I wasn't prepared. I have since learned that when it comes to achievement, it's always best to write it down, lock it to memory, and work towards its attainment. According to Jack Canfield, writing it down helps you keep your subconscious mind focused on what you want. Often, I write my goals down and repeat them aloud several times a day. This might sound silly at first and may even feel silly, but I assure you it works. The repetition of this process begins to lock the information into the subconscious mind, which is always operating on your behalf. Consider for a moment how many times you have written your name down and how many times you have said it out loud to yourself. Through this process, we have been programmed through the subconscious mind to be alerted when we hear our names. This is the very reason why we miss entire conversations except for when anything sounds close to our name is being mentioned. We go off and swear that the person was talking about us. Remember, always on your behalf. The lesson learned in Mrs. Allgood's class years ago was no exception to the rule. As I pulled my cheat sheet out, prepared to use it, I began going through the test questions, and my subconscious mind recognized the correct questions and answer pairs. The same has been true when it comes to writing down my goals. Once I locked the information to my subconscious mind, it immediately began working on my behalf to accomplish the goal. Since it is not granted us to live long, let us transmit to posterity some memorial that we have at least lived. Pliny the Younger. Chapter 17, The Last Amigos. August 2nd, 1997 is a date I would never forget. This was the day I learned the terrible fate of my good friend Mike, aka Lowe. I learned my good friend had been shot and killed. That moment was very surreal to me because only days earlier I had spoken with Lowe. I told him I would be going on leave in 1 week and coming to Radcliffe to visit. This was going to be a very exciting time as I had not hung out with my friend since the three Amigos parted ways and I joined the Marine Corps. I got off the phone looking forward to seeing all of my buddies. As the days went by, the anticipation grew until that dreadful day. I received a phone call early in the morning from Michelle. She told the horrifying story of how my good friend Lo was murdered. She gave me the word on the street and included the names of the people involved. As Michelle ran down the list of names, I recognized and personally knew the individuals involved, as we were all involved in the same inner circle. The accounts received from Michelle, as well as from others, made the shooting sound like a setup. The story that seemed consistent was Lowe was riding in the vehicle with two other men when the driver stated he had to pee. From there, all of the stories got sketchy as to who pulled the trigger. The why is still unknown today. In true Lowe fashion, I was told that my friend's last words were, "That's okay, I'm still about it." I later found out this was a popular song at the time by Master P. From that day on, every time I heard the song, I was reminded of my good friend Lo. A few days after hearing of the murder, I went on leave and was back in Radcliffe, Kentucky. I mustered up just enough confidence to attend the wake, but not enough to participate in the actual funeral services. As I looked into the coffin and saw my friend laying there motionless and not breathing, I was having trouble believing what I was seeing. The last time I saw this guy, he was full of energy and life. He was the kind of stand-up guy that would give you his last. I couldn't imagine one reason that someone would want to see him dead. Jermaine also attended the services for Lo that day. I never told him, but Jay was like the big brother to me. We met in the 6th grade and remained close friends ever since. In fact, on many occasions, we would tell people we met that we were brothers. Whenever we were together, I knew I never had to worry about anything. If something went down, he always had my back. I felt helpless as I looked at Jay at the funeral. I could tell that a part of him had died on that wet day as well. Jay and Lo had hooked back up after our Hinesville, Georgia days and remained close friends as brothers. Jay was never the same after that day. I think he somehow blamed himself for Lowe's death. Not that it was his fault, but just the fact that he wasn't there to possibly prevent the shooting from happening. I would still see Jay from time to time, and people would share how he seemed to come alive whenever I was around. However, to me, he just wasn't the same mentally. When we saw each other, we would always reminisce about the old days that always included Lo. Jermaine passed on December 21st, 2011, from heart complications, just 2 days after his 37th birthday. Thinking about my two brothers gone too soon reminds me just how short life is. From time to time, I post their picture on Facebook with an RIP message. For many, these two have long been forgotten. As for me, I often think about my amigos, those cold nights in Redcliffe, and the pitfalls in Hinesville. I also reflect on a time we spent together, learning about life. How we discussed one day we would do something with ourselves, be somebody, and change the world. I take our dream of changing the world with me on every stage I walk on. I carry the idea with me to every prison I enter, as well as every high school, college, and youth organization. I tell audiences my stories and of struggles I went through just trying to navigate through this thing we call life. I share with them the dream of three misguided youth, the dream which now only lives in me, the last of the Amigos. It's not the situation but whether we react negative or respond positive to the situation that is important. Zig Ziglar. Chapter 18, The Road Less Traveled. It was April 2000, and I had fulfilled my contractual commitment in the Marine Corps. The time had come for me to ease on down the road. I received my honorable discharge papers, and I was about to hit the highway. My last day in Yuma, Arizona was bittersweet. There was the excitement of me getting out, but there was also the nervousness and fear of what was to come. There's always that little feeling of uncertainty, especially when there is no definite plan in place. I only knew that I was getting out and heading to Florida. The fellas in my crew threw me a little going away bash. During the celebration, my partner, Ant, pulled me to the side and asked if I had some heat, firearm, to take with me on the long trip. I told him no, and he stated, I can't let you make the trip without one. I have an extra pistol I'm going to give you. Knowing I had the pistol with me on my long journey to the East Coast, just in case, indeed made me feel a little more comfortable. I relocated to Jacksonville, Florida, where I reconnected with my now ex-wife, AP, short for April. I met AP, also a Marine, shortly after reporting for duty to Yuma Air Station, and not long after we got married. We never really got along as husband and wife for any length of time, but as friends, we were the 98 Bonnie and Clyde duo. AP got out the corpse before I did, and because we were in the process of a divorce, she moved back home to Jacksonville. We would still talk on the phone from time to time, and as time grew near for me to get out of the court, we even talked about the possibility of me moving back to Jacksonville and giving us another try. AP and I had just moved into our London town apartment and decided to invite a few friends over. Those friends invited some more friends, and before we knew it, a party had formed. We were doing what we both love to do, entertain and play cards. I noticed that one of the guests, some friend of a friend, was getting out of order. He made himself just a little too comfortable with AP to the point of disrespect. Even AP became uncomfortable, quickly pointing out that I was her man. The individual eventually came over and introduced himself. The gentlemanly thing would have been to just shake his hand, smile, and say nothing. Since I had a couple of drinks and was feeling good, I replied, I was wondering how long you were going to disrespect me in my house. He must have felt a certain way as the comment caused a commotion where several words were exchanged. The guy had a couple of his friends with him, and of course, I had a few of my own on deck as well. I remember one of the last things the guy said before he left was, let's go. I hate to see a nigga get knocked out in his own house. I laughed to myself because years ago this might have been something that I would have said. In the heat of the moment, I went into my bedroom to get my pistol. I was a little hesitant at first, but in my mind, I rationalized the situation had escalated and gone too far, too fast. Without hesitation, I grabbed the gun. Just a few short minutes later, in front of our building, I could hear shots fired as the guy I had words with and his friends proceeded to shoot their pistols in the air as they drove off. While cocking the hammer back on the pistol that night, I looked over and caught a glance of myself in the mirror. Between my reflection in the mirror and the evil feeling taking over my body, I had the cold steel in my hand, knowing this was not for me. It was that uncontrollable feeling of being out of control which caused me to give the pistol away the very next day. My personal choices began to get better along my journey on the road less traveled. Years ago, this was not a decision I would have ever thought, let alone a decision I'd make. In the heat of the moment, my natural inclination was to strike first and ask questions later. In this case, I could have reacted negatively. That night could have gone several different ways, with some not ending in my favor. I have learned in many situations it's not the person, or it's the person with the level head and positive response that usually prevails. Given the choice to react or respond, I chose to respond. Man is where he is so that he may learn, that he may grow. James Allen. Chapter 19. No such thing as coincidence. In 2005, I received a call from my dad. Hey son, I just found out that you have an uncle that you didn't know you had. His name is Sonny, and he lives right there in Jacksonville. My dad gave me his phone number and I immediately called him. We spoke for a little while and introduced ourselves. It turned out he stayed on the west side of Jacksonville as well, and not too far from where I lived. It was a little late in the evening, so I told him that I would stop by on my way home from work the next day. The next day seemed to drag on as I looked forward to meeting my uncle for the very first time. I pulled up in his driveway as he was sitting in the garage with a drink in hand. Although we had never met before, within the first 5 minutes it was like we had known each other all our lives. We exchanged war stories and how we came to live in Jacksonville, Florida. The conversation went on and I discovered we were both Marines. Of course, that simply made our bond tighter. Uncle Sonny went on to say after getting out of the Corps, he went on to become a U.S. Treasury agent. He even went on to tell me of some of the assignments as an agent, including when he did security for Jesse Jackson. After retiring as an agent, Uncle Sonny moved to Jacksonville, and while getting his house built, he stayed at Gregory West's apartment in 2001. Coincidentally, I also lived there during the same time period. We hit it off and grew to be great friends. Imagine having an uncle you didn't know you had, and years later, by happenstance, you both have birthdays in August, both served honorably in the United States Marine Corps, both years later find their way to Jacksonville, Florida, both lived in the same apartment complex, and during the same exact time period, to not know the other even existed until decades later was an amazing concept. Some might call this a coincidence. I say it's God doing some of his best work. In the years to follow, Uncle Sonny and I shared great memories together. I spent most of my free time hanging out at his house, in fact, almost every day. Just as fast as chance reveals hidden treasures, at the very same speed they can be taken away. It was with great sadness I remembered walking into my uncle's hospice room, seeing him hooked up to a breathing machine with all sorts of tubes. It was a tough sight to see. I walked into the room filled with saddened family and friends comforting one another. My uncle just lay there gasping with every breath. I secretly prayed that the doctors were wrong and that there was still a chance that Unc would pull through. Deep down, however, I knew that those were the final hours. I knew that I would have to find somehow to the peace with the situation I faced. I left the hospice center that day having barely spoken to my uncle. In my spirit, there was a feeling of unease. It bothered me all throughout the following workday as I prayed that God would allow me one last conversation with my Uncle Sonny. My prayer was swiftly answered. On June 16th, 2008, I was blessed with an opportunity to have the conversation of a lifetime. I sat there by my uncle's bedside and watched as he continued to struggle with each breath. I spoke to him as I had many times before. At the end of our conversation, I told him I loved him and he would always be in my prayers. A couple of hours after leaving, I received a phone call from my cousin Karen, who delivered the news that Unc had passed. Somehow, having a chance to meet him, a chance to get to know him, and a chance to speak with him one last time brought me to a calm and peace. I was saddened to have lost him, yet appreciative of the memories we created together. I no longer believe in coincidence. Taking into account all of the small coincidences discovered through meeting my uncle Sonny has shown me everything happens for a reason. Many times, that reason is subtle and goes undetected. For me, in many instances, it was not until several years later the reason revealed itself. Every time my reason was revealed, be it an instant revelation or one which had taken years to understand, there was always an opportunity to learn, reflect, and grow from it. Thus, there is no such thing as coincidence. Every day I am watchful for what life is willing to reveal to me and always prepared to learn a lesson from it. The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. Mark Twain. In 2006, I graduated from the University of Phoenix earning a Bachelor of Science degree. That was a great day as well as a breakthrough in my achievement. This degree represented much more than just several family members coming from out of town to help me celebrate this momentous occasion. I reached a milestone in my life. I'd done what many believed was impossible. I have to admit, I was one of the many. At the graduation ceremony, our keynote speaker was none other than Mr. Motivation himself, Les Brown. At the time, I had heard of Les, but didn't know much about him. I had only heard him speak a few times. At the graduation ceremony, Mr. Brown told his story, and as usual, I was captivated from start to finish. He explained, in life, you gotta be hungry. He shared his humble childhood upbringing, how he was born in an abandoned building in Miami, Florida's Liberty City, labeled educable mentally retarded, EMR. Les Brown overcame a surmountable amount of trials, tribulations, and obstacles to rise to a level of success that many would only hope and wish to accomplish. I sat and listened to him. I was motivated and I was hungry. Then it happened. He went on to finish telling his story and said, "Now I don't speak for less than $10,000. My ears opened wider. I knew at that moment motivational speaking was what I was born to do." While working at CSX Transportation, participating in a professional development program, my mentor Everett Eddy suggested I join Toastmasters. Seeing that I was curious, he went on to tell me, Toastmasters is an organization that operates for the purpose of helping people improve their communication, public speaking, and leadership skills. I skipped through communication and barely heard leadership skills. However, my ears perked up when I heard the words public speaking. I had no idea what I was getting into when I attended my first meeting. I walked through the doors of CXX Toastmasters only knowing this is where I needed to be. If I was going to fulfill my purpose of being a public speaker and making $10,000 every time I spoke, this is where I had to be. Upon joining Toastmasters, I was provided both a competent communicator, CC, and competent leadership, CL manual. At this point, I totally disregarded the leadership manual. What I was after was in the communication manual. I began researching what it would take to complete the first level in the communication series of Toastmasters. I discovered 10 speeches were required to earn the title of competent communicator. At that point, I thought to myself, my plan was set. I complete the 10 speeches and allow each speech to be a chapter in my book. That'll give 10 speeches and 10 chapters. I'll have a book. I'll be a speaker and on my way to making $10,000. It has been more than 6 years, and I am just finishing up my first book. The financial manifestation will come from seed sown. I'm doing what I love to do, speak. As far as Toastmasters, I've continued to attend meetings and have discovered so much more. The initial reason I joined Toastmaster was not the reason I stayed as a member. It was the leadership development that kept me as a member. I began channeling through the ranks of Toastmasters, starting out as their sergeant at arms. It wouldn't be long before I was transferred to another work location and couldn't attend meetings on a regular basis. The move gave me an opportunity to start a club at my new location, where I went on to be the inaugural club president. CSX Toastmasters at South Point has been in existence since 2011 and is still a thriving club. While I served as president, the leadership bug had bitten me. I went on to serve as the area governor, followed immediately by the division governor. With each position, I was afforded the opportunity to be of service to more and more people. That was it. I discovered my true purpose in life, which was service to others. I agreed with Zig Ziglar, who stated, "You will get all you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want." Service to others is what drives me. It keeps me moving forward. By serving and leading others, I in turn serve and lead myself. I don't want anything from anyone else that I wouldn't want for myself. Our struggles are never the same. However, all of our struggles are very real. If I can help at least one person to fight less, then my struggles will not be in vain. We all have a story. My story will be my legacy. My past will not define me, but catapult me into greatness. In doing so, I look to inspire those who need to hear. I believe my story will help someone not to go through some of the pitfalls I've had to endure. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. The Lord's Prayer, chapter 21, the power of forgiveness. I'm sure I've read those words in the Bible thousands of times. It wasn't until this particular night the words stuck out to me. I would fall asleep quickly once my head hit the pillow and my eyes closed. On this night, I tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. Eventually, I decided to get out of bed. I went in the living room and sat in my favorite chair. My favorite chair is where I do some of my best thinking, besides in my bathroom. I didn't turn the TV on as I usually did. Instead, I just sat there in silence in the dark. I sat there and began to pray and meditate. I love the way Deepak Chopra described this experience. He said, "Prayer is your speaking to God, and meditation is allowing the Spirit to speak to you." That night, as the Spirit spoke to me, I was led to the Lord's Prayer. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive. For a while I couldn't pass the word forgive. It kept echoing in my spirit. Forgive, forgive, and forgive. Finally, I kept reading and it began to make sense. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Later, I realized the unrest was due to my lack of forgiveness. Earlier that day, I received a letter from one of my childhood friends, Cam. Cam was more like a brother to me. We've shared everything from clothes to women. I opened the letter and quickly began reading it. As I read the letter, a familiar feeling of calm had come over me. It was as if a hardened egg was cracked as the words on the letter replayed in my mind. I sat in a chair that night and thought about my friend Cam. I remember when he moved to Jacksonville in 2007. I was very excited as my brother and I would now be living in the same city. He stayed with me for the first 6 months as he transitioned from the move. For a while, it was just like the old times. I was hanging out with my brother again. It wasn't long before I noticed some changes in Cam. The changes were subtle at first in his character and his actions. I also began to see items disappearing in the house. A couple of dollars was missing here, a watch disappearing there. All fingers seemed to point to Cam as the culprit. In months to come, Cam found a place not too far from me and moved. We still saw each other often, and occasionally items would still come up missing. By now, I knew for sure it was Cam. It was always small amounts of money or insignificant things. Nothing worth ending the kind of friendship we built over the years. I could see his addiction was getting worse as he would often disappear for days at a time without letting anyone know where he was going. I hated seeing my brother out there like that. He had gone too far and there wasn't anything I could do for him. Returning home from work one day, as I pulled into the garage, I noticed broken glass just below a window. I investigated a bit farther and saw a window had been busted out. A strange feeling came over me as I entered my house. Somebody got me, I asked aloud, as I continued assessing the damage and I felt so violated. Over the next couple of years, frustration grew as my house was broken into 2 more times and I could not find the culprit. There was a breakthrough one day when my neighbor recognized the intruder as Cam, whom she had seen at my house on many occasions. She described his actions to me as he walked back and forth from the front to the back of my house. She said he walked up the street and then to the back of my house again. I didn't want to believe the words I was hearing. I don't know if I had ever been more disappointed in my entire life than the day I found out it was Cam breaking into my house. Not once, but 3 times. That was it. The reason I couldn't sleep. The letter stirred up emotions in me and eventually led me to the Lord's Prayer. Cam was the trespasser that I had to forgive. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespassed against us. As many times as I had to read the Lord's Prayer in my lifetime, I had never understood it in the same context as I did that evening. It was primarily asking God to forgive us of our wrongdoings as we demonstrate our ability to forgive those who had done wrong against us. Powerful. I once heard it said, holding a grudge against someone else is like swallowing poison and expecting the other person to die. The grudge I was holding against my brother was eating me up inside. The poison I took was unforgiveness. The burden on me holding a grudge against my brother was lifted on that evening. I also learned a treasured lesson in forgiveness. Whenever we think something isn't going right in our lives, there's always potential to learn. Fortunately, I was in time with my spiritual relationship with God and remembered the scripture. When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years. Mark Twain. Chapter 22, Father Knows Best. During my senior year of high school, I decided to compete in the school's talent show. In school, I had always been the class clown, so there was no doubt I was funny. It felt natural for me to do stand-up comedy. I quickly began gathering material and putting a routine together. What better material to use than what the audience already knew? I joked about our basketball team's embarrassing record, people with morning breath all day, and shared personal stories of growing up getting whippings. During that time, the Rodney King beatings in Los Angeles was a big topic of conversation. The joke that brought the house down was a joke about getting pulled over that morning on my way to school. I explained watching the news and how I already knew what time it was if I got stopped by the police. I immediately jumped out and assumed the position on the ground with my fingers interlocked, only to have the officer look in confusion as he told me I had a tail light out. I finished the set talking about how the basketball team got Rodney King'd every game. It was hilarious, and until this day, I still get commentary about how funny I was that day. It felt good and great to be on stage, and even better to have the audience busting out laughing at the jokes I told. After waiting through all of the other acts, it was finally time to announce the winners. I anxiously waited to see if I had placed in the contest. My nerves was bad, but I had a feeling inside of renewed confidence. Regardless of what the outcome would be, I became a different person that day. The votes were tallied, and I came in third place, though you couldn't tell by the applause. I did such a great job, the directors asked me back to MC the talent show the following year. I was elated. A lot of great things come to mind about the day of the talent show. The thing that meant the most, my dad was in the audience. We were in a fairly large building, although my dad was all the way in the back. I would catch a few glimpses of him as I delivered my comedic material. When the show was over, I remembered walking up to my dad to ask him what he thought. The words he replied with have remained with me until this day. Son, I didn't know you were that funny. I won't ever forget the smile he had on his face that day. He was certainly pleased. Growing up, my dad and I clashed a lot. In my teen years, we never saw eye to eye. Over the years, he gave me plenty of valuable knowledge and advice, both spoken and unspoken. He saw the road I was traveling in life and advised me early where it would lead. Being a teenager, I guess I thought I had all the answers. I remember thinking just how wrong my dad was about my friends, my life, and where I was heading. I thought, how ignorant could he be? Early in life, I vowed when I grew up, I wouldn't be anything like my dad. Boy, was I wrong. My dad's unspoken example has subconsciously been the roadmap in my life. I realized despite my earlier opinion of him, I ended up more like my dad than I would have imagined. For example, my dad joined the Army, so I enlisted in the Marines. My father continued his education, so I was motivated to continue my studies. I was like my dad right down to his stubborn attitude. The thing I admired most about my father was the fact he had been with the same woman for over 42 years, my beautiful mother, Sheila. I had the luxury of only knowing one dad and one mom my entire life. Often I looked at my parents in amazement. They had been together longer than I had been alive. Their children, Reggie, George, Eric, and Selena, had absorbed the love they displayed over the years. What an excellent gift for a child to receive. Although my dad and I have not always been on the same page, I wouldn't be half the man I am today if it wasn't for him. I love, appreciate, respect, and admire the man my father is. As his namesake, I look forward to the day when I will have a son. I will without a doubt pass on knowledge, wisdom, and advice, just as my father had with me. Unknowingly to me, he was the potter and I was the clay. Listening has probably been the most valuable skill I've had to learn. In the end, This skill has paid great dividends in my life because my father does know best. This above all, to thine own self be true. William Shakespeare. Chapter 23. Know thyself. I am living proof that an individual's past is not always an accurate predictor of his future. I am the epitome of the saying, your future endeavors do not have to be dictated by your past indiscretions. A lack of drive and ambition marred my life as a teen and young adult. My high school and college years passed as unrecognizable blurs due to my immature attitude and inability to focus. During this time, my main objective was to be the life of the party and not for my education. Reckless and irresponsible behavior eventually led to me becoming homeless and ultimately to an incident where I was held at gunpoint. This all occurred before my 21st birthday. It was only after a gut-wrenching, eye-opening conversation with a family member that the light came on. I realized there was more to life than having fun and being the life of the party. Despite the conversation and my realizations, I had no goals or aspirations for my life at that time. Divine intervention led me to enlist in the United States Marine Corps. Finally, while serving in the Marines, I developed a new confidence. I began to focus on my purpose while instilling discipline and fostering my leadership skills. My ability and willingness to quickly adapt to military life led to several awards and a commendation from superior officers. Also, to give me a sense of professionalism and accomplishment, the Marine Corps allowed me the opportunity to build my relationship with God. This metamorphosis inspired and highly motivated me with a new outlook on life. After being honorably discharged in 2000, I was encouraged and enrolled at the University of Phoenix, where I received a bachelor's degree in business management. The completion of this educational degree culminated me in obtaining employment at CXX Transportation. During my career at CXS, I took advantage of various development programs, both personal and professional in nature. It was while participating in a mentoring program that I was encouraged to join Toastmasters. Navigating the waters of Toastmasters, I have spoken, made visits, competed against others, inspired, motivated, empowered, challenged, and served others. The desire I have to compel others to reach their fullest potential and beyond has captivated and inspired a diverse audience. These audiences range throughout the southeast region of the United States. I am well aware that many individuals struggle with the idea that they can change their reality by changing their mindset. My strength lies in my ability to convey the evolving but consistent relationship between thought and action. My very life is the blueprint for talking the talk and walking the walk. I believe it is my divine mission to challenge myself as well as others to better your best while never leaving one's life unexamined. In a novel, the author usually controls the conclusion. In a self-help book, the reader writes the conclusion. This means action on your part. Dr. Billy B. Sharp.